Hey everybody, so today we're going to be talking about Age of Wonders 4 again, and in particular we're going to be talking about the Nature Affinity Tomes. Now, 2 days ago I went over the Order Affinity Tomes and it took 2 hours. Today I'm going to go over the Nature Affinity Tomes and I'm hoping it won't take me 2 hours. But the longer I make these videos, the more you guys seem to like them and click on them anyway. So I don't even really, in a way, I don't really even consider these to be like a tier list video. I mean, this is a tier list and I do try to put it, so if you want to see a tier list, go to the end of the video and click on that. And you can just look there for my general thoughts on them. But I consider these videos to be more of like practically like a nerd podcast where we just kind of talk about this stuff at this point. I used to do videos and I have been for like a decade now. And this is sort of, I've kind of realized that this is just what I like doing most, is just not really trying to restrict myself to just talking in like 10 minutes or 20 minutes and doing like a rapid fire video going over things. But what I like most of all is going over all these things in as much detail as I can, because I just sort of like talking about gaming and gaming concepts and those sorts of things. So you don't gotta watch this entire video if you don't want to, but if you want to, you could always just, use it as a podcast and just listen along, blah, 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 blah. As always, I have to remind everybody, please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment on your thoughts, any agreements or disagreements or anything like that. If you want to disagree, that's fine. I just got to say this a little bit because it helps my channel out immensely. I've actually gone up by hundreds of subscribers in the past few days as you guys have responded to these videos very positively, and I do thank you guys for that, because that's been a wonderful boon to my mental. Because when I start making these more long form videos and I just start being like, well, this is what makes me happy, so I'll just do long videos talking about this stuff, right? My thoughts are always, maybe I'll get like 1,000 views on them. It's not really that big a deal, right? But lately these videos have been doing pretty good. And, don't get me wrong, I don't think I could continue to talk about Age of Wonders 4 forever, right? Like, I don't think I could sit here and put out like a 2-hour video every other day on this game and you guys will watch it all. But I think for now, we got at the very least a good thing going. I do intend to go, Total Warhammer is doing like DLC next month. We'll go over that, stuff like that. But for now, I kind of want to wrap up everything in Age of Wonders 4, because even though on the Nature Tomes, I don't think that I'm like 100% accurate here, because a lot of these tomes are very confusing. In my Order Affinity Tome, most of those tomes are generalist, and you just generally have this tome is better than that tome, and so you'll go into that, right? There's not really a lot of counterplay or building in those sorts of tomes, but in the Nature Tomes, a lot of these tomes are about builds and having a build, and they're very, very good in a build. You can have a tome that's absolutely amazing and vital to one build, and then absolutely useless if you're not going that build. So I would say for the Nature Tomes, I'm like the Order Tomes, I was like 95% sure I was like totally accurate. For these Nature Tomes, I'm more like 90% sure I'm accurate, but that still makes me far more accurate than pretty much anyone else on YouTube. Anyone who puts videos out on YouTube, I mention this every time I do these sorts of videos. I think the vast majority of people who do YouTube videos play the game very lightly, don't put much time into the game, and really generally have a very loose, very shallow understanding of the game. Like, they kind of understand the base level of the game, like enough to say, like, this is what a nature, like they know the words Nature Tome, but they really don't seem to understand the game's fundamentals. Whereas what I did when I'm trying to understand the tomes is I went and I played a nature build, and I played in multiplayer, I think 3 different times, kind of refining it, trying to understand things a bit better. I read through this entire list, blah, 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 blah. Spent another, I think, 3 hours this morning. I did that for the Order Tomes too. I spent another 3 hours this morning just, looking at all these tomes, thinking about different builds, thinking about how they had impacted my experiences with them, and thinking, okay, if I was to tier this tome, where would I put it? And some of them are harder than others, but so here we go. Okay, Tome of Alchemy. Okay, let's talk about this one. Now, I've actually, for the Nature Tomes, I did ask a lot of people their different opinions on this. Tome of Alchemy seems to either dwell, for a lot of different opinions, it seems to dwell either from a good to an absolutely vital tome, depending on what your different builds are. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Tome of Alchemy is a, what's the right way to put this? tomes in this game, as I said in the last video, but I kind of need to emphasize again, they're making your own tech tree. Unlike a game like Civilization that has a stingy tech tree that you move up and you're always going on the same tech tree every single game. In this game, your tech tree is unique to you, and that tech tree is your tomes. And a lot of people have never really mentally processed that fact, but it's kind of really important when we talk about tomes like Tome of Alchemy. Because why is Tome of Alchemy so good? Because when we start the game and we have Tome of Alchemy, you need to understand that there's some things that it does that some people consider absolutely vital. One of those is the Alchemist Lab. The Alchemist Lab is a building that you get from this tome that counts as a research post and gives you 10 knowledge. So already you can put a research post down, and knowledge is the best resource in the game. And as I do go forward here, this will also be important, just so I get some base things on nature affinity. For Magic the Gathering players, this is probably really obvious. Each different affinity has like certain things it's good at. Green affinity, nature affinity, is really good at healing, mana, and food generation. I would say in order, it focuses on food, then healing, then mana. Those are the three big things. It also has a lot of summons and things it can use off that, but that's getting more into the specifics. So Alchemist Lab in Nature tomes is really good because Nature, I don't think, is any other than Tome of Dragons, which is also a split tome. I don't think Nature is any other way to generate research posts. So if you're trying to do a more nature-focused build, then Tome of Alchemy can be extremely good for you because it helps get you that nature affinity. Nature affinity is quite good because the Empire buffs from nature are, I would say, slightly, they're good. They're not the greatest, but they're at least average. Much better than Order affinity at any rate. So Alchemist Lab gives you the ability to get more knowledge. Now it's 10 knowledge, which is pretty good for one building slot, but then it gives you 3 knowledge per adjacent unique province improvement. That can stack up really quickly. Other ones will stack based on like how many you're nearby. So if we look at the Order tome really quick here, which one is it? The Abbey is 10 plus 3 per farm. That means you need to specifically have 3 farms next to the Abbey in order for it to generate 19. That's kind of hard to do and not really that applicable. The Alchemist Lab, on the other hand, doesn't care what you have. It could be anything. It could be a farm, a forest, so long as it's not the same thing twice. And because of that, the Alchemist Lab will generally produce more knowledge than practically any other early game building I can think of. Tome of Cryomancy has a Tome of Cryomancy, which generates knowledge, but then mana per adjacent snow or ice. So this ability could generate the 10 knowledge, but then it's generating mana beyond that. The Tome of Alchemy just generates a lot of knowledge. So before we go anywhere into that, merely picking Tome of Alchemy, a lot of people just consider outrageously strong just because you're getting one of the best buildings in the game just for unlocking the tome. So when we look through the different options here, I don't really consider these to be that amazing. But I just wanted to emphasize the Alchemist Lab because you can slap this down anywhere, and practically anywhere you put it, you will probably hit 3 different things, be it a farm, quarry, forester. It'll probably hit 3 things and give you 19 knowledge, which is really good for a building like this. Now, first off, I'll have to explain what miasma is so you guys understand this. You create afflicting miasma, so you modify the terrain in a battle to be afflicting miasma in a 1 hex radius. It's not that big, but it can affect a few people. Afflicting miasma, enemy units passing through or ending their turn on this hex will get weakened. So this is definitely a good way to debuff enemies' damage through giving them the weaken debuff, which reduces your damage by 10%, stacking up to 5. And then if they end their turns on it, not only get a stack of weakened, but then if they're on it at all, they get afflicted. Now what afflicted does is you put dots on enemies depending on what damage type you do. So that's not, I'm not going to go into every specific one, just they're dots. They're the damage over time effects. We can all understand what a damage over time effect is, right? So long as someone is in the miasma, you can then hit them with any attack and they'll slowly build up dots. So this is a spell, it does come out at 15 mana, 20 combat casting points. And do remember, as I mentioned in my previous video, and I kind of do need to mention again, mana is how much it takes out of your global mana, but combat casting points is just how much you're allowed to cast in a battle. Combat casting points take away from your allowance in a battle, but it doesn't actually take away from your world map resources. So the 15 is kind of high for a tier 1 spell, but its effect is AoE, and it is pretty strong. And especially if you're kind of getting into those early game fights where it's just a bunch of shield units beating each other on the front line for a few turns, this spell can give you a lot of dots and weaken a lot of people and give you a lot of strength in there. Now, that one is okay. I don't consider it to be amazing. Now, as I did mention, I do say now a lot, don't I? As I did mention in my previous video, which I will keep saying, maybe I should stop saying it, but Mysterious Tonic gives all support units a free action ability. This free action ability is quite good in the early game. It falls off a little bit as the game goes on because you start adding so many debuffs to enemies, but particularly in the early game, it's quite good because it's a free action. It never really falls off. It's always a free action. If you are next to an ally for a free action, a support unit can give them 2 random positive status effects and dispel one of their negative status effects on them. So all your support units are now way better at buffing up allies and cleansing some of their debuffs. This in particular can be impactful if an ally is stunned or has some sort of really high dot put on them or something like that. If they got hit by pyromancers or anything like that. This is just a free action ability that for the entire rest of the game, your support units can now just do this freely on their turns. It is cooldown 2, so you can use it once every 3 turns, which can mean, you know, for the most part, you're probably going to use it once a battle, twice at most. But it is still a good effect to just give. All the priests are good. Now, Afflictor is a unique unit in this tome. You do not summon it down. You just build it from draft. It is 60 HP, 1 defense, 1 resist, which I believe, I'm just going to double check here really quick, and I know how to double check it. I do believe, yeah, that's completely average for a tier 2 archer. So you're not getting a stronger archer, you're not getting a weaker archer so far as durability is concerned. You're just getting an average durability archer. Now, it does have 8-4 as its damage. Most archers at tier 2 will be 12. The one advantage they have is 4 that damage is coming in as blight damage. Magic damage will generally always be better than physical damage outside of extremely specific circumstances. So it will, on average, actually outdamage other archers coming in at tier 2. Its special ability is Miasma Shot. For a single action point, you can put Afflicting Miasma on the hex of an enemy and do 20 blight damage. So I would say the Afflictor is... I would call him a decent unit. If we look into the actual stats of the unit themselves here, do they put Afflictor here? Yes, they do. If we look at the stats, it doesn't do anything else unique or anything else interesting. I think it has slightly above average status resist, and that's about it. As a unit, it generally just sits in the back and hits people. Shoot, repeater, crossbow, its special ability has no special properties or anything like that. It just does a decent chunk of damage. So the Afflictor it's a decent unit, but it's not great. You're not going to focus any builds around it. But for getting access to a tier 2 archer, that would be pretty good. You just get access to a pretty decent archer at tier 2 who just sits there doing pretty decent damage. Miasma Shot is not that amazing of an ability. But it is just a single action, so you can move into position, then shoot Miasma Shot. It only has a cooldown of 1, so you can use it every other turn. So you can move into position, shoot Miasma Shot, spend your next turn doing 3 actions to hit, then spend your next action getting into range for a Miasma Shot. This can also be pretty good, again, for those early game fights where it's mostly just your melee hitting the enemy melee, because you put the Afflicting Miasma on their hex. So let's say you hit a shielded unit with it, you bypass all their armor because you're doing blight damage, and then your tanky frontline units can just hit it, and generally you'll probably make them bleed a lot from the miasma. Now, Materium Refinery is another building. I did talk about the building in order, which gives you 5 gold and knowledge for each rank above stable. Unstable. So on average, that order building was giving you 5 gold, 5 knowledge throughout the early game. This one gives you 5 gold, 5 knowledge. Once again, but then if you have a magic material in the city's domain, you get +5/+5. Not to stack, but generally always have 1. That means the material refinery with some builds, for example, if you decide to take the society trait, we always get a magic material nearby. You can get this building; it'll just give you straight up 10 knowledge, 10 gold, which is pretty good for building. Additionally, if you've settled other cities and you've got them in a decent position, they'll generally, not always, but I'd wager like 70 to 80% of the time, they're going to have a magic material in their domain as well. So then you can slap down the material refinery there, 10 gold, 10 knowledge. Once again, that's a pretty good building. I'm not saying the material refinery is the best building in the entire game, but I would say that it is a pretty good building that it has no downside. It has no upkeep or anything. You just get it, you build it, free gold, free knowledge. Fumigation is a siege project. This one can actually be pretty decent in the early game. If you're trying to wipe out some free cities or anything like that. At the start of combat, units defending the city take 16 blight damage. Most early game units won't have any form of resistance, or even if they do, it'll be at most like 2. Unless you gave your own race resistance, and then they could resist the fumigation, but that won't really matter that much. And then they suffer 2 poisoned. 2 poisoned is 8 damage, and that's over 3 rounds. So over 3 rounds, they'll suffer 24 damage. So this is a pretty good siege project that, with not that much investment, can make the battle with a free city pretty easy to win, because you're just hitting the entire army for pretty good damage. Then we got the last one, Anti-Magic Tincture. Now, this one is, I did mention this earlier when I was looking at the Tome of Discipline. Getting the ability to just cleanse debuffs, and you hide that in your bag of tools, and you just have that for the entire rest of the game, the entire rest of the campaign, if you want to call it that. That's pretty good. So it's a buff spell that comes in at mere 10 mana that cleanses all allies. This is not unlike the Mysterious Tonic, which only cleanses 1 debuff. This cleanses everything. Then it gives you 2 status protection, which would be 4 status protection, which is pretty good. So Anti-Magic Tincture, I would say, is a pretty good ability, I should say spell, for just having it in your arsenal and just having that AoE cleanse for the entire rest of the campaign, should anyone try to do some dot-based build or anything like that. So there's really nothing weak in this entire tome. Outside of the Alchemist Lab, nothing is like Giga S tier mega strong, but generally speaking, a lot of builds can definitely get a lot of benefit from Tome of Alchemy, and it is a tier 1 tome, so any build can take it because it's tier 1. So that's generally why this tome is considered so strong, is because anyone can take it, and it really doesn't have any downsides, and instead just has a lot of benefits. It doesn't have any summons, and it doesn't have any buffs for units damage. So I guess, there are other tomes like Cryomancy, I would say is still probably stronger than this one, but as a second tome, or as a tome for a faction that can get a lot of units down on the board on their own, or a faction that just has gold to buy out units or anything like that, this tome is pretty strong. I've actually liked it a lot, and the Alchemist Lab is just generally a really good building that can be used to generate way more knowledge than you could otherwise. Tome of Evolution is basically the opposite of everything I just said. Tome of Evolution is terrible, and I don't think I've ever actually seen this tome used well. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use Tome of Evolution strong at all, ever. I think this tome desperately needs buffs and is quite weak right now. But let's talk about this. And by the way, people ask why I don't have chapters or anything for my videos. That's because these videos, I typically do like 3 hours of research, and then I do like 2 hours of recording the video, and then I go try to play games for like 8 hours a day to try to continue to increase my knowledge, so I'm actually good at the games I'm talking about, and then I sleep, and then I wake up and I do it again. So unfortunately, looking through my videos and doing chapters, I know it would only take maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes, but like at the end of the day, like when I get done, I pretty much just like go to sleep, and then I wake up and here we are again. So I guess in a way you could say I'm lazy. Sure, I agree. But if you guys want to do chapters, I'll put them in the video. If not, well, again, I do kind of intend these videos to be more of a podcast. So let's talk about why Tome of Evolution is so weak. First off, the building. Do you see a building? No. No, in fact, you don't see a building. It is no building. It's a tier 1 tome that doesn't give you any building. Now, it does give you 5 technologies, if you want to call that knowledge thingies. Are any of them good? No. So first up, we have Youthful Rejuvenation. This heals an ally for 18 hit points and also gives them Strengthened. If the unit has evolved, they heal for 36 and get Resurgence as well. Is this good? I would say, ironically, this is pretty much the best spell in this line. Youthful Rejuvenation, if you hit a unit with Evolve, heals 36. But it is 10 mana. So a lot of other single target heals are only 5 mana. So you're paying double the price to get this effect. A lot of people don't really consider that. You can't really just go into a battle and just youthful rejuvenation. Even if you have the combat casting points to use it, you really shouldn't be. So it is good, but okay. Then we got Slither Hatchling. This is not a summon. You do have to actually build this unit. It is a skirmisher unit with 60 HP, 1/1 resistances. So I think most skirmishers at tier 1 have 55 HP. This one's got 60. This makes it slightly above average, but you can't summon this like Zealot. So you can't just drop this on your army. You do need to go build it at your base using draft. So that's kind of a downside, but it does have Draconic Rage, which when it's under 60% HP, it does plus 30% damage. So it really only has positives, I guess is one way to put it. It is technically kind of like an above average unit. It also has low maintenance, reducing its upkeep. That's why I like to go into the unit browser so you can actually see everything. It doesn't, the tomes don't always say everything, but you can see it is low maintenance. It's pretty good on the stat line, so it doesn't really have any weaknesses at all. It's quite a good unit, in fact. Its ranged ability is Venomous Spit, which poisons an enemy on a 90% chance and does 14 damage. The 14 is a bit underwhelming, but I would consider this more of a melee unit that happens to have a ranged attack. Then its melee attack does plus 20% damage against poisoned units. So what is the downside of Slither Hatchling? It's not something I would build. Even if I could build it for free, I don't know if I would anyway. And then it has the downside of you can't summon it into a field. Like, you can't just drop this into your army. Now, its main attribute is once you get it to the legend rank, it evolves into a tier 3 Slither. Now, there's a couple problems here. Most evolved units currently have an issue where once they evolve, they actually typically end up weaker until you get them experience again. So the evolve mechanic is not really as strong as you're thinking it is. It's really only strong once you get to be like the full-on dragons from the tier 3 units, which I'll get into later. For the most part, evolving will debuff you. I don't know if they changed this, but I'm pretty sure when you evolve, you lose all your ranks and go to rank 1, and you end up being quite weak now, actually, because you should be losing the soldier, veteran, elite, champion, and legend, all these resistances, all this HP. Now, this is a pretty good skirmisher unit, I'll give you that. It's not really anything I want. It's just, I don't know, and it's a good unit. I'm not saying it's a bad unit. Then we have Rapid Evolution Enchantment. Now, this is good if evolve units are good, but I don't really like the evolve units, so it's okay. It doesn't scale the best, but it does kind of scale if you go with an actual Dragons build. But, like, is it something I can just put as a Tome 1 enchantment, walk away, and then it just buffs me for the rest of the game? No, you have to deliberately go to using it. So all units that evolve get 20% more XP from combat, which is good, and then slip away. This means that instead of dying in combat, they then slip away, get 15 more hit points, ending up at 16 hit points, and then that's it. The first time they die in a battle, they teleport away, heal a little bit, end up at 16 hit points, and stay alive. This helps them stay alive to evolve a bit longer. Unfortunately, Slip Away only affects tier 1 and 2, so this will not be affecting your tier 3 dragon units should you opt into that. So it's okay, but once again, you're playing directly into units that already I don't think are that amazing. So yeah. Summon Wyvern Hatchling. Now, this is a unit that you can summon onto the battlefield, and I would say that Wyvern Hatching is probably... I would say it's... why is Wyvern Hatchling not here? Oh, no, I'm looking at it. I'm blind. Think about Wyvern Fledgling. So, Wyvern Fledgling is a unit. It is technically better than the Zealot. Once again, technically. Melee strike hits for 12 damage. 1 armor, 1 resist, 60 HP, giving it a pretty good stat line here. It is unfortunately is that actually good? No, now that I think about it, that's not actually good, is it? Yeah, that's actually bad. That's below the Zealot. And it does less damage than the Zealot even. Wait, no, I was totally wrong. I gave this unit way too much benefit of the doubt. It's actually below average for a tier 1 unit. Only the Slither Hatchling seems to be decent. It is low maintenance, which does reduce its upkeep, but its stat line is pretty bad for a unit that only just runs up and hits people. You can summon it to the field, but it does less damage than a Zealot. Tanks less than a Zealot. Its advantage is when its hit points reach 60% or lower to use 30% more damage. That can be okay. I don't hate that. But overall, as a unit that once again wants to evolve into a full-fledged Wyvern, we have a unit that will often have difficulties surviving until it can even become a Wyvern. Most of the time it's going to die. The Slither Hatchling is at least, it's got like a ranged harassment, so it can stay in the back and not die sometimes. But the Wyvern Fledging, not only is it flying, so it's going to sprint in the front field and get killed if you ever try to auto battle, but even if you painfully play out every single battle, it is so squishy that most of the time it's just going to die anyway if you try to take any of the more difficult fights. Meaning if you're using Wyvern Fledglings, you only really want to take these super safe fights, which isn't good for your expansion or anything like that. The only thing it really has going for it is unit maintenance being low. I don't think much of that unit either. So this leads us to Draconic Vitality, which gives every unit in your army, or I should say for your race, 3 hit points per unit rank. Now that is pretty good. You can recruit a lot of units, especially with the new ambitions and stuff like that, at rank 3 or above. So technically this could read your race gets plus 9 plus HP, which is decent for sure, but with the way the health has worked, with there being so many buffs to health and there being so many ways to get more health in the game, that 9 HP is really not that amazing anymore. Especially as like a race transformation that's supposed to be like one of the main goodnesses of this book. So rapid evolution enchantment does not really help. The only base game unit with evolve that would be racial, I think, is a peasant spearman. That comes from feudal. Feudal is really bad. Peasant spearmen aren't really amazing either. And even if you did have it, it would actually be ironic that once your peasant spearman evolves, it goes back to being rank 1 and then loses all the HP anyway. So Draconic Vitality, it is tier 1, so it shouldn't really be trying to be that impactful, but I certainly do think the other minor race transformations for tier 1 are a little bit better than Draconic Vitality. It gets completely blown out by Spawnkin, although Spawnkin is kind of premier. But even with that said, it also, the one I was saying was okay, but not that great. Inner Mastery also blows it out. 20% healing received in combat is going to be way more than 9 or 12 or even 15 HP. As the game progresses and if you're intending to build lots of healing, Inner Mastery is 2 more health on every Grace proc, for example, if you went for Tome of Prosperity later on. It also gives you a status resist. So Inner Mastery, while not being that amazing, but still being impactful, this one is actually bad. Like Draconic Vitality doesn't do it. Now we have no building. We have no generically good spells here, or anything I'd want all the time. The unit roster itself is pretty underwhelming. So the Tome of Evolution is just awful. I just don't like it at all. Tome of Beasts is a very niche tome in that Tome of Beasts is the tome you go if you want to immediately ram into another player, conquer them, and remove them from the game. Now, it is pretty good at that. So, yeah, it is pretty good at ramming into other players. Now, why is that? So first off, it does have a building. It's a forester that gives food and then draft per adjacent province with forest. Now, that's not per adjacent forester. That's just any province with forest, which can end up being a lot. All you need to do is slap this down in any area that has a forester and is surrounded by forest, which you'll generally understand to be a lot. This also counts forests that aren't even in your domain. I do believe they changed that. So you can end up getting, on a bad day, you'll get like 15 draft, 10 food, which is pretty good for building. Yeah, you can then produce various animal units using draft, but that's not as strong as you think it is, but it's not too bad. So the first spell we have right here is Marcus Prey. Target enemy unit for 5 mana and only 5 mana gets 3 Sundered Defense and Distracted. Distracted makes everything flanking, so you deal plus 25% damage. So Marcus Prey allows you early in the game for a mere 5 mana to kind of try to just completely remove one unit from the battlefield. With 3 Sundered Defense and Distracted, they will generally just get annihilated when you focus fire them. It's pretty decent, I would say, Marcus Prey. Yeah. Animal Kinship is another minor race transformation coming in at tier 1. Makes a target race more bestial and connected to animals. When adjacent to a friendly animal, both units are granted 10% damage, 10% critical hit chance. So that's about 15% damage when adjacent to a friendly animal. Now, there are lots of ways to summon animals, including things like Wild Speaker, summon wild animals, stuff like that. You can generate animals not too difficultly. All you need to do is have either one of your race next to the animals, or you need to have one animal next to your race, and you'll generally get a pretty decent damage buff. Now, this does last the entire game, and it is a little bit restrictive because you can't go full animal stacks, but you also can't go full racial stacks. You need to be a little bit mix and mix. Best way I found to do it is to either use, use melee animals and ranged, or at the very least support racial units. Then you slide in the support racial units kind of in the back, running up to buff people or stuff like that. And then you got the animals in front getting the damage buff, doing the damage. So I found that to be the best way to use this. I don't think it's bad. It is a lot of damage, but it's also a little bit niche. Summon Wild Animals is just a generic tier 1 summon ability. Its advantage is that you can summon a random tier 1 animal. Most of the tier 1 animals are going to be... Can I actually... Fey, Beast, Curse, Fiend, Dragon, Elemental... Surely they have... Am I blind? Do I not see it? Animal. There we go. So most of the tier 1 animals are not that amazing on their own. They're low maintenance units, so they don't have that high of upkeep. But as for their actual stats, a generic Zealot, I think, is better than any of these. I don't think any of these come up to the stats of a Zealot. I don't think a single one of these do, in fact. Yeah, so most of the tier 1 animals are just going to be low maintenance. You spam them, you build stacks, and you try to run into enemies. Now, it does have a chance to summon tier 2 units. Now, the tier 2 animals, while also being kind of weak, do have a pretty high tendency to be pretty weirdly statted, let's put it that way, where some of the tier 2 units just do a lot of damage. And yeah, being able to get tier 2 units this early in the game is pretty good. So the tome does have a bit of RNG, and you might need to put time into understanding where to summon the animal, what terrain gives you the best odds. For example, if you summon on ice, you can potentially get ice spiders. Ice spiders are absolutely incredible as a unit you could get early in the game, because they do an AoE chance to freeze enemies on their web, which if you land 2 freezes into a stack of enemies, you can practically win the battle just on that CC alone. So summon wild animal, it generally does summon weaker on average, but it can summon tier 2 units, which are pretty good. And then all animals have low maintenance, so it's pretty easy to afford larger stacks of units. Call of the Wild is a single target buff spell that for 15 mana, or no, it's not single target, it's a small target, there we go. For 15 mana, all animal and cavalry. So it is kind of important to ensure that your race has as much cavalry as they can get. But all animals and cavalry will get 2 bolstered defense and 2 strengthened. It's not the best spell because this is not as impactful as you're thinking, but if you need a power boost early in a game, if you have a 6v6 fight or anything like that, Call of the Wild can definitely give you way more damage and defense than you otherwise could get without it. So Call of the Wild is pretty decent to have in here. Marcus Prey is also decent. So we got a decent transformation that synergizes with summoning. Then we have the Wild Speaker. This is a tier 2 support unit that does pretty crappy damage. It's not exactly the tankiest either. 50 HP. I think tier 2 supports some have 60 HP. So what is its advantage? Well, it has 2 abilities here. And let's go look at them. I'm looking at the wrong thing. So let's go look at the abilities here, if I am smart enough to click the right thing. So the abilities here, I should mention Poison Best has no chance to poison, in case you think about that. So the 2 abilities are Unleash a Beast. For a single action point, for 3 turns, target animal unit has killing momentum and strengthened. This is way stronger than you're thinking, because I was talking about the action economy earlier. Killing momentum is the unit regains 1 action point when killing another unit with a melee, magic, or physical ranged attack. Now, this is impactful because if you give this to a charging animal, in addition to giving it 2 strengthened, it can charge into position, hit an enemy, finish them off, then get an extra movement point to attack potentially another adjacent unit, or if you had a little bit of movement left, run into another position and get off another attack. And this lasts for 3 turns. So if you happen to get some high tier charge units, or just have a pig or something like that, Unleash the Beast can give you pretty good action economy. And the 2 strengthened is pretty good as well. Then, of course, we have Conjure Animal, which for 1 action point allows you to summon a tier 1 animal unit onto the field. This summon lasts for 4 turns. This allows a wild speaker to just walk up to an enemy unit and summon an animal right in front of them. Now, I do believe the animal gets full action points after being summoned, but they might have changed that. Some do, some don't. It's kind of frustrating to know. But I do believe you can just walk up, summon it right on them, and then have the animal attack. It is a typical defense mode warding, which is, that's just the extra support unit's defense mode. Not really that big a deal. Now, of course, we have Caretaker. Animals in the army require 20% less upkeep. So in addition to the low maintenance of animals being minus 25%, we have Caretaker for minus 20%. This ability is less useful than you would think, because upkeep reduction, I think I can read it here, it does cap at minus 50%. You can never have below 50% of its upkeep. So the problem with Caretaker is that if you have any other form of upkeep reduction from, for example, feudal or anything like that, your upkeep reduction can clip very hard. So example, if you went feudal animals, you'd have 20% less upkeep from wild speaker, 20% less from feudal, and then you'd have 25% less from the animals themselves, bringing you to 65% upkeep reduction. Well, that already brings you to 15% of that is being wasted. Almost the entirety of Caretaker would be wasted. But in other factions that aren't feudal, you shouldn't worry about it that much because upkeep reduction is kind of a rare stat. There are some things that give it, but it is kind of rare. So Wild Speaker is just generically a good support unit, although it is, again, a bit squishy. It can get poked out by range units and die pretty easily. But overall, I would say the Tome of Beasts, it's very specific for what it's trying to do, in that it's just trying to rush people and be very strong early game. But it is pretty good for rushing people. I would say it does kind of fall off the later and later into the game you go, so you kind of need to ensure that if you're going Tome of Beasts, that you're getting a good position out of it. Tome of Roots it's not a bad tome, but I find it does get outperformed. If any of you are old, then you'd know Mortal Kombat had all the ninjas that were palette swaps of each other. That's kind of how I consider some of these damage tomes to be. For those of you who are young, Mortal Kombat, the first one from like 30 years ago, had a thing where they just palette swapped the different ninjas. There was yellow ninja, blue ninja, white ninja, purple ninja. I'm sure I'm missing one here. Green ninja. Now that's kind of how I consider Tome of Roots. And then we've got Tome of Cryomancy, and then we've got Tome of Pyromancy. They both, all three of these tomes give you a ranged dot. The ranged dot applies the dot, and then your melee buff does more damage against said dot. You've got the poison one, you've got the fire one, and you've got the frost one. Although the frost one doesn't apply a dot, it only applies slow. So generally speaking, all three of these do kind of different, but not really things. Now, whereas Tome of Pyromancy is a ritual pyre, which does give you a decent amount of mana. Not that amazing. It's probably not a great building. Tome of Pyromancy gives you a summon and gives you the Pyromancer. Tome of Cryomancy is considered so good because in addition to getting Frost Arrows and Frost Blades, you get the School of Cryomancy, which is a research post which people generally consider good. Tome of Cryomancy also gives you Blizzard, which is a very good spell, and a summon. And the summon can just sit back and poke people as a ranged skirmish unit. So overall, we got that. So let's compare that to then Tome of Roots. Tome of Roots gives you Healing Roots, a 10 mana heal, not 5, but 10 mana. So already it's more mana than a lot of these other heals. It doesn't do anything other than heal and give regeneration. So Healing Roots suffers from being, 10 mana instead of 5. It's okay, but it's just a single target heal that costs twice as much as many other early game single target heals. We have Blight Blades, which does have some advantage in that it gets bonus damage against poisoned or decaying. So we do have two different effects that it can get the plus 20% damage against. So Tome of Roots does have an advantage that it does synergize with more things throughout the game. But it should be mentioned that Tome of Cryomancy does have a little bit of a synergy here as well, where Tome of Cryomancy, the Frost Blades, paralyze against frozen and slowed. Although these are more rare things, it does, it's just something worth considering, I guess. So Blight Blades is probably the easiest to get the debuff on because there's a lot of sources of decaying and there's a lot of sources of poison throughout the game. So I would say that Blight Blades is easiest to proc. But then we have Summoned Entwined Thrall. Summoned Entwined Thrall is a tier 1 skirmishing unit. And if we look at this really quickly, we can see that I do not think highly of it. Do they not? There we go. It's just not showing up in the other list. It's 50-1-1 for its stats, so it doesn't have the greatest defensive stats. Then it also has -4 fire and -4 blight resistance. So it's weak to two things that you'll find a good chunk of early game. It gets a little bit of shock resist, but overall it's weak to more elements than it's strong to. It also has 5 less HP than other skirmisher units. Its range attack is a 16 damage, so a decent damage, single-use range attack that has a 90% chance to poison. It has no other real specialties other than its melee strike can also poison, so it does have a little bit of self-synergy with Blight Blades, but overall I would say it's not really that amazing. It's just squishy, and it's just squishy. Not much to say about that one. So then we have Vine Prison, which is one of the best spells in the game. Why is Vine Prison one of the best spells in the entire game? Because it summons 5 living vines in a 2 hex radius. These living vines lock enemy units into zone of control, and whenever they try to move away from them, they will then try to immobilize enemies. That's really strong. These Vine Prisons just are really, really, really strong. They will constantly lock up the opponent's backline and either A, require them to use a lot of their actions removing the Vine Prisons, B, force them to walk their units away from the Vine Prison to get out of their zone of control so they can use their more powerful abilities, thereby wasting their turns, because most powerful abilities that require you to be out of zone of control require all 3 action points. So you spend 1 action point walking away from it, and then you don't get to use your powerful ability you might be using. Or what could happen is you try to walk out of its zone of control and you have to roll to resist its entangle. And if you don't roll to resist it, you now spend your entire turn in the Vine Prison zone of control, not being able to use any ranged ability. So Vine Prison is amazing for an early game ability that can just completely control the battlefield. Despite coming out of tier 1, it does cost 30 mana, which is a lot. But I would consider this to be more of a mid-game spell that it remains relevant throughout the majority of the game and is very, very powerful. It's quite frustrating for enemies to deal with that they could spend an entire turn getting out of Vine Prison only to be slapped back into Vine Prison on the next turn anyway. Then we got Poison Arrows, which is just a generic, you deal range damage and then you have a chance of inflicting poison. It applies to range units and skirmishing units. So it does have some synergy with skirmishing units. It does have some synergy with, well, I mean, obviously range units, both of them. But it does mean that Summoned Entwined Thrall, for example, would then also have poison arrows. I've never actually checked if it can stack the chance to poison twice. I'm not sure about that. But at either rate, any archer you have or any skirmisher you have, skirmishers will get the effect increased because their attack is non-repeating, so have a 90% chance to poison. So at any rate, Poison Arrows is a pretty good ability. Probably the best thing in this tome. Blight Blades, Poison Arrows are all these 3 are good. So why would I rate the tome lower than other tomes doing similar effects? So they have Herbalist. Herbalist is a conduit building. It's really hard to build conduits. They don't give you knowledge. They only give you mana. Most buildings don't need a conduit to boost them. There are some you would need to you'll need a conduit to build that building, but early in the game, you want to be focusing mostly on buildings that allow you to boost other buildings, which is to say there's a very big lack of need for a conduit. Now, for a conduit, it is pretty good, granted that. It gives you 5 food, 5 mana by default. Then, any adjacent province with a forest or swamp, which doesn't have to be in your domain and doesn't need to have anything built on it. It only needs to be a forest or swamp. It could be a quarry, a farm, it could be anything on a forest or swamp, will then give you 2 food, 2 mana. So this right here could very easily, with the right setup or with the right luck, this could very easily generate over 20 resources. The problem is mana. Food is generally considered the least useful resource just because of how the game's math and all that functions. Food is generally considered the least useful. So it does have a second effect that friendly armies in this city's domain regenerate an additional 5 hit points per turn. But generally you don't want your damaged armies coming back to your domain to heal. You want them either not being damaged at all or able to heal enough while out fighting and clearing that they don't need to come back. So this effect is more of a slaughter rule where it's like, oh no, I'm in a very bad situation and this will help me in that bad situation. But you don't want to be in this situation to begin with. And that's Tome of Roots. It's okay. So, and that's the thing. So Tome of Alchemy generally eats a lot. It eats good. Tome of Roots is okay. Tome of Beasts is good in a rush. Tome of Evolution is terrible. So nature tomes don't have the best options for tier 1 tomes other than Tome of Alchemy. So going into tier 2, we're going to notice a really big problem right here. Tome of Fey Mists. I should start with Tome of Fertility. Tome of Fertility, once again, we've got a tome that's a bit more niche. It requires you to kind of be using a specific setup like Tome of Evolution, Tome of Beasts, even Tome of Roots kind of needs you to have a specific setup to make it good. So Tome of Fertility's building here is Bountiful Fields. Now this is not the worst building, but you might be noticing a repeating pattern here. It is a farm upgrade that gives you 10 food, and then every adjacent grassland or fungal field gives you food and mana. So once again, we have another building focused on giving us food. Food generally not considered that good. It will generate a lot of food, and it will generate a lot of food easily because grassland is easy to find. You can slap this down and easily hit 4 or 5 grassland. I'd say you could easily probably hit 4 at the very least. So nearly from that perspective, it generates 22 food and 12 mana, which is not a bad building. It's just generally, most people don't really like generating food because other things are just going to be better. In addition, by generating this much mana, some builds don't really need that much mana and some do, so we're kind of being restricted into builds that need mana to begin with. Mana isn't something that's just generally amazing all around like production, but it can obviously be really good. Some builds can run out of mana. So what abilities do we have? Animate Floor. Now this doesn't say Summon Floor, this says Animate Floor. So it is a 15 mana spell that any Flora obstacle transforms into a Flora Stingle unit. And for 3 turns, you get this summoned unit in the battle. So in the middle of a battle, you summon this and then you get it in the battle. Do you keep it after the battle? Well, no, obviously. But in the battle, you get to keep it. So this can allow you to summon a unit behind the enemy lines and just start really hitting them hard. So what is the problem with Animate Floor? Why is this maybe not the best? So it comes in here and it has a typical plant weakness. It can be burned. It's not that tanky, but generally enemies won't want to be spending. Oops, sorry, my bad. Generally, enemies won't want to be spending that much time on their turns dealing with summons. So it does die in 3 turns. Its melee strike is just 10 damage. So if you want to throw it into melee range of an enemy and beat them down, it won't really be doing that much because it's only 10. Poisonous Spores is a little bit better of an ability, but it's on a cooldown. So it's a 4 range ability that will always hit with a 90% chance of poisoning and 20 blade damage. So that's pretty good, but you can only use it once after you summon it. So you summon it, you run in, hit with a good Poisonous Spores, then try to run in and melee strike them repeatedly. It's okay. Healing Roots is you heal 6 temporary hit points for every unspent action point. So it can kind of sort of use that, but that's only if you get the unit itself. As a summon, this would be useless. Why would you want to heal your summon? It's a slow unit as well, so it's a bit easy to, let's say, kite out. It's okay. I would say that it's firmly okay. It's just not blowing my mind. It's only 15 mana, but at the end of the day, there's almost no world where I'm going to be using my turn of casting. I'm always going to be using it to cast Vine Prison. There's almost no world where I'll be using it to animate Flora. So up next, we got the Temple of Fertility. You might be noticing a repeating pattern here. The problem is Temple of Fertility is a building that gives food and food per population. Food is generally not considered that great. Now, it does give a lot of food. If you have a mere 10 population in your city, you're generating 40 food and 10 draft. That's a lot of food, and that's not that much draft, but it's decent. It does also scale throughout the game. Problem is, a lot of times when you want to build food, it's on the smaller cities. But it's not a bad building. It does keep your cities big and healthy and increasing in size throughout the game. So I'd say Temple of Fertility, despite giving food, is generally going to be probably one of the better food buildings you can get. But it's not generating knowledge. It's not generating production. So it's kind of, it generates a lot of the worst resource, but it does generate a lot of it. So it's not that strong, but it's kind of strong. And you'll see my opinion on it will always go up and down, because like generating food isn't that great, but it is a lot of food, but it does generate food, but it is a lot of food. So it's kind of hard to gauge. Restore the land. This can be okay. It's a 30 mana spell. You cast it on the world map, and target friendly or unowned province transforms into temperate and adds a grassland. So you can't put this in an enemy city. If someone's trying to do a snow build, you can't like transform all their snow into grasslands and screw over their bonuses. But this can allow you to take areas of the world that other people couldn't settle in, and maybe you can put a city there. So if an event happened, if one of the world event happens that turns things into desolate, you can be like, no, grasslands. If there's a desolate area of the world and you can settle near it, that can be good too. The only problem is the mana cost can stack up. If you wanted to transform the entirety of a desolate land into grasslands, that's already looking at 300 mana. But if you've got some areas that you just want to transform into grassland, it's pretty good. Or if you just want areas of the world that you could move on better, that's pretty good. It's not an amazing spell by any stretch of the imagination, but it has some uses, I guess. Summon Nymph is an interesting unit that I'm torn on. I don't really like it. And let me explain why I don't really like it. Let me see, is Nymph here? Yeah, okay. So the Nymph is a, does it count? It counts as a Fey. There's not many buffs for Feys. It does count as a plant though as well, which is decent. But we can see by being a Fey and being a plant, we can see it has some bonuses against spirit damage and lightning damage, but -6 to blight and -4 to fire. These aren't exactly uncommon damage types, and they hit you pretty hard. Now, it does have 80-4 stats. It is tier 3, and you can summon a tier 3 unit, so it does have its advantages. I would say that it's decently tanky for a support unit, but it is also tier 3. Does a pretty good chunk of damage here. Poison Blast, although it doesn't apply poison, does 20 damage. So in a pinch, it can be a decently high damage unit. So it's decently tanky, although being weak to certain things, does a decent chunk of damage. Its ability is a range 3. Friendly units are fully cleansed and get 2 regeneration. This ability can be quite good because it can cleanse every dot off an ally and then give them 2 regeneration. Although Oathsworn and their abilities kind of makes fun of this, it's still generally like one of the better abilities in the game. It'll heal 12 HP at the very least at the end of your turn, so it'll always heal at least 12, although not instantly, so you don't get your models back in a squad to deal more damage, but it does heal 12, and then if you keep them alive, it'll be 12, then 24, then 36, and if you do have other sources of regeneration, it can prolong that regeneration and stack more on top of it, up to 5, of course. So this ability is pretty good. So why am I torn on this unit? Well, in addition to these weaknesses that I'm not too big a fan on, it's Seduce. Now, this is its second ability. Revitalize is generally its best ability, but Seduce has a 60% chance to dominate an enemy. If unsuccessful, you distract them. Now, the problem here is you have a 60% chance to walk up and potentially just automatically win a battle, or a chance to distract an enemy so they take more damage as an entire action. The dice roll on this ability is so hard, and I really wish they would change it. I would really rather prefer Seduce was changed to be like a 100% chance, resistible of course, but like a 100% chance to dominate for one turn, and then if unsuccessful, like do a better debuff, so that the unit wasn't so feast or famine. Right now, it either can kind of like win a battle on its own or do practically nothing with its turn. And it doesn't really have much of a middle ground. Now, Revitalize is good, and hitting people really hard is good, but even against units with good status resist, you still have that 30% chance to dominate. So maybe you go for the Poison Blast because you don't want to roll the dice, but maybe you just go for the dice roll. Being one of its strengths, it kind of sucks that you're going for a dice roll. Now it is a Fey unit, so if it hides an obscured or a mist cloud, it gets a random positive status effect that will synergize with a tome I'm talking about later. But even if you don't go that tome, you can just hide it in an obscuring terrain, and you can just stack up buffs slowly, which is nice, I guess. Overall, I'm a bit torn on that unit because I just don't like the complete and total dice roll on it. Blossom of Life is a spell. Now it is very costly, perhaps too costly, but it is a 2 hex radius 3 regeneration. That'll be at least 18 healing at the end of your turn, or you can use it to prolong regeneration effects, or you can use it to just stack up regeneration. It's pretty good, but it's a lot of mana. I would like it if its mana cost went down. Maybe instead of like 45-30, it would be like 40-25, because at the end of the day, healing at the end of your turn and only 18 is really not that amazing. And at the end of the day, it does mean, unfortunately, that Tome of Fertility is best used on really tanky builds. And nature does do pretty good with tanky builds, but I just think this spell as a whole, it requires too much setup to be good. You need units that are damaged, who aren't going to die next turn, so that they can continue to regenerate. They need to be in a 2 hex radius of each other. It's not like global. And because it takes your entire casting turn, and because it takes so much mana and combat casting points, it's not that amazing. So Tome of Fertility, and this is why nature tomes can be really hard to rank. Tome of Fertility is another one of these tomes that if you're playing for it, and you're playing around it, so we've got a Revitalize unit for tanky builds over here, a pretty good spellcaster, and you can summon her, so you can be building your tanks. We got Blossom of Life, which can be good, Temple of Fertility, which can be good, but the problem is, there's nothing in Tome of Fertility that's like a heavy hitter. You're like, yes, this is amazing, and that's kind of why Tome of Fertility can be frustrating to rank, because it's very niche and specific in what it's doing. Now, Tome of the Fey Mists is a bit more generally good, and I've seen a lot of people like this build, and I've seen a lot of people hate this. So, Tome of Mists was really, really, really overpowered, and then they kind of nerfed how accuracy works. I would say Tome of Fey Mists is still good, but it's less good than it used to be. So once again, we have another one of these problems where we're getting a conduit building. This building at least does something unique in that it makes every province in the city's domain misty. Misty means enemies can't see those units, and all enemies in your domain will have reduced vision range, which makes your cities with a Feywater Pond a bit frustrating to siege, because your enemy doesn't know, does he have 3 armies right there about to defend it, or is this just a completely blank target? And because all your armies are invisible, they could walk up their army and then just instantly you're right there. Or they could not walk up their army and your armies aren't even nearby. With a -4 vision range, it also makes it even harder to kind of like scout out what's even happening there. Then even every turn in combat, if you do enter combat in a misty domain, mists can appear every single turn in the combat. Overall, though, it's a conduit building, which I really don't like. Its special effect is +3 mana per adjacent forester. Now, it's not forest, that's forester. So I would say overall, this building is using the entire building slot to just kind of play a bit defensively. I don't really like it, nor do I really think it's that good. I just don't. It's a good building for playing. What's the way to put it? It's a good building for playing like thematically. It's not really a good building, period. So yeah, Summon Mistling is a unit. Obviously, Summon Mistling is a unit. It's a bit hard to gauge, but I would say it's actually not even a bad unit. It can often be quite frustrating to try to fight. So let's go here once again and Mistling. Now this is a skirmisher unit. It's tier 3 and it's exactly stat like all other tier 3 units. Because it is a Fey unit, it gets the Spirit Resist and the negative Blight. Now this isn't that bad. I think Plant is bad. I think Fey is overall just a buff. It ignores the vision penalties from Misty and ignores the accuracy penalties from Clinging Mist, which I'll get into later. Now, the Mistling is always going to be really hard to shoot with range, and it's going to be a bit of an annoying ability. It is a range 4, 90% accuracy attack at range, making this a 24 damage skirmishing unit with blight damage and lightning damage, so it's probably going to hit some weakness of somebody. Or maybe it'll hit the resistance, I don't know. At either rate, with 16 of this damage coming out as magical damage, this is a pretty hard-hitting ranged attack. And then, whenever it hits an enemy, it has a chance to inflict a random negative status effect of any of them. So these units are pretty hard to hit with ranged units, and can just do actually a good chunk of damage from range. I found them to be quite damaging. Their melee attack does 26 damage, which isn't the highest damage for a single-use attack, but whenever it does hit a unit, it teleports back 3 hexes. So 3 hexes, generally speaking, puts you out of range of an enemy's ability to triple attack you if they're single-use hits. So what'll generally happen is if an enemy shield unit runs up and hits you, you Misty Strike, you teleport back before the retaliation, doing 26 damage. Then if they run up to hit you again one time, you Misty Strike again. You'll win this trade 10 out of 10 times. The only units who could potentially win the trade are Spearman units or Charging units. So this unit pretty hard counters shield units at any rate. Those fighters, those sorts of units. Now, Fey Trick, of course, if you have more Mistlings, allows you to just reposition pretty hard and slam enemies with range damage. And of course, because Fey Trick is a single use ability, this does allow you to use the skirmishing units buffs to use Slippery and Swift to run away from enemies and try to shoot them at range. Now, shooting them at range, if you're moving to max range, will be kind of a low % hit chance. But if you do hit them, once again, you absolutely kerplode them with a nuke that can inflict a random negative effect. So this unit could potentially, I'm not saying would beat a charge unit, but in addition to getting the first hit on a charge unit, could then back off and hit with another Fey Trick, back off and hit with another Fey Trick, and it could potentially, as long as a charge unit doesn't get the first action, and because it's ranged, it really should get the first action, it will be really, really hard for enemies to deal with. So, yeah, and then Clinging Mist reduces the hit chance of enemies in melee as well. Normally hit chance is only for ranged attacks, but Clinging Mist is one of the effects that can reduce melee chances. So yeah, let's just say it can be quite frustrating to try to kill this unit. So let's talk about Trail of Mists. At the end of this unit's turn, it creates a mist cloud on this unit's hex. Then because it is a Fey unit, it gets Fey Guile. At the end of the turn, if this unit is obscured or in a mist cloud, it gets a random positive status effect. So that's pretty good. I should also mention Mist Clouds. Units that end their turn on this hex gain Clinging Mist. So it creates a mist, and then because it's a Fey unit, it's kind of complicated, but I'm sure it makes sense. It creates a mist, which then gives it Clinging Mist, but then because it's a Fey, it then gets a second buff to get a random positive status effect. So the longer the fight goes on, the stronger this unit will get. This is one of the more complicated units in the game. That's why I have to spend more time on it. The longer a fight goes on, the more powerful this unit will get. The random status effect buffs it can get can be regeneration. it's not a mythic unit or anything like that, so it does get all the buffs of being a skirmisher unit, which if we have poison arrows can be poison. So 90% chance to poison and a chance to get a random negative status effect and positive buffs and clinging mist to be hard to hit. This unit, it's called the Mistling. It's very frustrating. Know its name. They literally had to rework how hit chance works because this unit was really, really frustrating for a lot of people to deal with. Yeah. And then, of course, it just creates mist clouds, which, if we go back into that tome, because we're not done here, this unit can get even more complicated, I assure you. If you get Fey touched, this will turn your entire race into Fey Guile, your entire race into people that can use the mist. So in addition to creating the mist for itself to buff, if it continues to walk around, even your tanky units, even your shield units could also then be walking onto that mist that it's creating and getting buffs from that. So generally just a very strong unit that sorry, it can be a bit difficult to use, a bit complicated to use, but can confer so many buffs between these two effects right here. But we're not done. Tome of Fey Mists continues, I assure you. Then we have the grants all support units the Fey Blessing ability. As we go into the action economy, we once again have another free use ability, but this one, all the other ones we've looked into for the most part have been 1 range. This one has a free use at 3 range. It heals an ally for 10 hit points, gives them a random positive status effect, and gives them a stack of Clinging Mist. Now remember, this stacks. So if I have 1 stack, I have negative 15% accuracy to enemy. 2, 3 stacks, I have negative 45% accuracy to enemies. So your support units can now stack this buff up, and the more you're reducing your accuracy, the better it is. To give you guys the best math at this, if my enemies have negative 25% accuracy, now that's not, it's what I'm about to say isn't how it works in game, but I'm just trying to give you a general example. If they have a negative 25% chance to hit, then they are still doing 75% damage. But if I go from 25% chance reduction to 50% chance reduction, all I've done is go from 25 to 50, so you'd think, oh, well, they do 25% less damage. Well, no, because their 75% chance to hit just went to a 50% chance to hit, so they're actually doing 33% reduction. If I go from 25 to 50, the 50 to 75 reduces their damage to half, because they're going from a half chance to hit to a 25% chance to hit. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is stacking Clinging Mist can, especially at 3 stacks, be extremely strong and make enemies very frustrated as you continue to run away, heal, buff yourself, and just generally be annoying. And because the Fey Blessing ability can be used every 3 turns and is a free action, this allows these support units to make your units quite difficult to deal with. Combine that with the Summon Mistling, who can run away really easily and harass people at range really easily, and you could end up in a situation where you're never even giving your enemy a solid front line to fight back against, and you just keep running away and harassing them. I'm not saying it'll work. I'm not saying it's like a auto-win strategy, but it's certainly a different way to play the game. Now, Fey Embrace is okay. It's basically a buff for your own army. In a 1 hex radius, you place mist clouds, which if you do, of course, have the Fey Guile ability, these mist clouds will, if I read it here, then give your units Clinging Mist. So at the end of your turn, in a 1 hex radius, you'll give your entire army Clinging Mist. And, well, yeah, I mean, that's about it. And then you get 2 random positive status effects. So, yeah, I'm trying to read here. God, I get complicated myself. So you get 2 random positive status effects on use. Then you get another one from being Fey. So then you also then at the end of your turn get Clinging if you're standing in that Clinging Mist. So Fey Embrace is 15 mana, which isn't that much. And depending on what random effects you get, some of them will be better than others, of course. But depending on which random effects you get, this ability can be outrageously strong or pretty good. Okay, now the last ability we have here is Lingering Mist. This allows you to make any province in the entire world misty for 3 turns. And of course, as we walked into on Feywater Pond, Misty is an effect that all units in that province have universal camouflage, and so long as you're Fey, you won't get the -4 vision, but they will. And then if you take combat in here, mist clouds will randomly appear. So Lingering Mist is a world map spell that can be used to hide your army, or it can be used to place on an enemy army to screw over their vision, and just generally make them paranoid, or it can just generally be used to buff a province to make it cause more misty during a battle so you can get more buffs. Tome of the Fey Mists is an expansion. It does come from an expansion, but what it does is very, I mean, this is why I had to spend so long explaining it. It's very unique and different, and a lot of people do like going it because it's so unique and different from a lot of different other tomes. I would say it's very good, but it's not broken anymore, but I'd say it's still very good. Now we have Tome of Glades. Once again, we got, actually no, this one's just generally good. I would just call this tome generally good with really no downside. So Tome of Glades gives us the Glade Runner, which is just a generic tier 3 archer coming in with 80 2/2 stats. It's just a generic tier 3 archer. They do generic tier 3 archer damage. I don't think they do anything. How far bound do we have to scroll here to find it? Is it not here? Did they not put it here? No, Glade Runner, there we go. The Glade Runner, he doesn't do anything that unique on his own. He does get True Sight. So the unit can see invisible or camouflage units within its vision range. So it can be used to counter some things on the world map, some universal camouflages, things like that. That's kind of not really worth mentioning, but it's worth mentioning, I guess. They also wear a very skimpy outfit, if you noticed. So they have a very manly body. One of their unique effects is they have optional cavalry. So if you have a cavalry buff, this unit will mount, which allows it to move very quickly, reposition very well, or get into range for the double shot a little bit better. It does have that triple shot at 14 damage. That's just pretty average. Its unique ability is a free action use effect on a 3-turn cooldown that gives an enemy 2 marks, reducing their evasion by 20% chance, and sundered defense, reducing their defense and status resist. So overall, I would say this is like a pretty solid tier 3 archer. It's not breaking my brain. It's not like overpowered. It's not a must-have, but I would call it like a pretty good archer. I don't think there's any faction in the game that is a tier 3 archer by default. Oh, no. Oathsworn Harmony does. So if you're looking to get a tier 3 archer, and you're looking to get it from a pretty good tome, then, well, I mean, to be real, the Tome of Glades is a pretty popular option for that one. It's a building here. Let's look at this one. It's decent, but not that amazing. It's a food province that just gives you 10 more food. That's it. It's not really that great. Its second effect is city stability per nearby conduit, which is not hard to do, but at most we're looking at like 5 stability. Once again, not blowing my mind. If you fight on the hex, you get encouraged, which is okay, I guess. Overall, this building, I would rate this building as worth building eventually. It's not amazing, but okay. So we got the good Glade Runner, and then we've got Create Forest, which creates a forest. This one's a little bit more useful than Create Grassland, because you can kind of put it on enemy armies to screw over their movement speed. You know, like on the world map, you put it on enemy armor, and oh no! Other than that, it's not blowing my mind. You can also alter the terrain for a battle a little bit, I guess. If you know what maps will spawn on what terrain types, you can alter it to be a little bit more advantageous. Grassland can do that too. So I forgot to mention that. You can alter the terrain a battle is played on with this spell, like at the last moment. Like right when you take a battle, you create a forest on it, and you're more likely to get a forest map. Okay. Leaf Skin, I would actually call generally good. I would call Leaf Skin actually pretty good. It does a lot of different effects, which it does include +1 resistance. That's just a generic all magic damage deals less damage to you. That's good. It gives you Forest Walk, which allows you to move through forests at normal movement speed, which is pretty good. That's pretty good. It allows you to run around the world map better, reposition better, do anything like that. Okay. Then we have Forest Camouflage. This unit cannot be detected when standing on forest hexes. That's really good. If you have an entire army with leaf skin, you can just hide your army on a forest. Any forest. Unless they have true sight, they can't spot you. Combo that with Crate Forest, and you can make very frustrating armies. Now, the only problem is there are items that can drop in the game that give people true sight. So an enemy can just randomly have that laying around, put it on an army, and oops, now you're detected. So you can't rely on it. It's best used defensively, or best used when an enemy doesn't know that you're not there. If they know that you're not there, then they could easily find you. If they don't know that you're not there, then they could just walk past you. They're not thinking there might be an army here. They're not thinking that because they don't know that they don't know. But if they know they don't know, do you get what I'm trying to say here? You need to not reveal that you're not there. Okay. Aspect of the Root, I would call a generally good ability. This goes into action economy. A lot of times you want to end your shielding or your polearm units in defense mode. They might have buffs from being in defense mode, or they might just want to be in defense mode so they don't get smacked on the front line. Most of the time it's better to attack than to end your turn in defense mode, though, as that's just kind of how action economy works. How do we solve this? Aspect of the Root. Heal 30 hit points and enter defense mode on a 2-turn cooldown, so usable every 3 turns. This can be used by shield and polearm units. If the battle is kind of in a weird pokey phase, you can use it to heal off damage while ending your turn in defense mode, which is a pretty good choice of your actions. Or even if you're in the front line for a battle, if all your unit is doing is soaking up damage, then you can use Aspect of the Root, healing them and ending in defense mode, so now they soak up even more damage, which is pretty good. I consider Aspect of the Root to be pretty good. Then we have Summon Entwined Protector. This unit, am I blind? Sometimes they don't list them correctly in the right category. So this is another plant unit. So we have the typical plant unit problem of blight weakness, fire weakness. Not great. Okay. It is a non-racial unit, so it doesn't get your racial buffs. So I do think the developers need to go through and buff basically every non-racial unit, because at this point, traits have gotten so free and easy to use that non-racial units almost always play from a penalty. So we look here on Entwined Protector, we got 107.3 stats, which you would think would be pretty good, right? And then if we go look at Industrious and we look at a Bastion, they got 107.2 stats. So you think, Entwined Protector, they're better than Bastions. But the problem here is every racial unit will have buffs from just being racial. They'll either be a cavalry unit, or they'll have more HP, more armor, more resist, athletics for more movement range, something. So these non-racial units tend to be at a lower value. A, they don't get race transformations at all, which puts them at a negative. And then B, they don't get the trait points at all, which definitely gives them a negative. So this unit is not really that amazing baseline, especially because it's coming from a tome that already gives every unit Forest Walk anyway. So a plant having Forest Walk is not this like huge amazing thing, right? Is it good? Is it worth building? Well, it is a summon, so you can slap it down into your armies at a whim, and that's probably its best attribute, is you can take a battle, maybe win, maybe lose, summon more Entwined Protectors into the field to replace your front line. So it is pretty good at that. It does synergize somewhat from the tome. It is Healing Sap, a once per battle ability that heals it and adjacent allies for 20 and enters defense mode. If you combo this with the shield ability that you got from the tome, you can end multiple turns. You can end multiple turns healing yourself or allies and staying on the front line and just generally being really tanky. That, of course, gives you pretty good synergy, I would say, with the Tome of Glades, because you have these Glade runners. Yeah. So Tome of Glades, I would say, is actually one of the better tomes from nature. The only real issue is the Sacred Meadow is definitely one of the buildings you can unlock. And that's the nicest thing I can say about it. Tome of Cycles is a very confusing tome. it does some things really good, and then it doesn't do other things at all. So the worst part here is you're noticing this tome, both the tier 3 nature tomes don't open with a building at all. Now this is compared, Tome of Cycles and the other tome can be most easily compared to Tome of the Cold Dark. Tome of the Cold Dark, on the other hand, and I'm just comparing this to a shadow tome, has the ability to turn everything into snow and then get food and production on snow, and then has an amazing, ridiculously good building here. And I'm just showing you this to compare why I would rate these nature tomes so lowly. This building gives you 10 knowledge, then 3 knowledge per adjacent snow or ice province. Every province will be snow and ice by the time you get this. If you have a province with only 5 connections, this is 25 knowledge. That's really, really good. Then anyone who visits this area can get every single physical attack has a 30% chance to inflict frozen for the next battle. And you can get this just off this one building. That's crazy, crazy good. So we have everything turns into snow and gets a buff. We can have oh my god, I forgot about this. We have an AoE nuke that reduces status resist. We can transform our entire race into frostlings with Arctic Walk, with frost resist, with immunity to frozen, with morale when on cold terrain, Veil of Darkness giving us universal camouflage for 3. So here's Tome of the Cold Dark, and that's how good that is. Now let's go look at the nature tome. Tome of Cycles. We have no building here. And then we have an ability, or a spell, Diffuse Health. So target enemy unit suffers 30 blight damage and gets decaying. Friendly units in a 2 hex radius heal 15 and get 1 regeneration for 45 mana and 30 combat casting points. This means all allies, in order to get this AoE buff, have to run up around an enemy and be pretty close to them, and then they get this heal. It's firmly underwhelming. I've spammed it and won a fight before, but I would say you kind of need weirdly specific situations for this to be good. Now, I do think if they just made this a 3 hex range, it might be a little bit overpowered, but I'd probably like it a little bit more, because right now it's basically a single target debuff for one enemy that you need to clump all your units around. That just makes it very difficult to use. The decaying effect is also odd because they now can't heal, but at the end of the day, if I'm using diffuse health on an enemy, I'm probably trying to nuke them to death in one turn. The only exception would be maybe if an enemy had a Giga Hero I was trying to kill by decaying them so they couldn't heal while healing like 3 units I had around it. Overall, it's just not really that great. Parting gifts can be pretty good. Until the end of battle, whenever a friendly unit dies, all other friendly units within 2 hexes heal 12 temporary hit points. So of course, this can combo pretty well with summons. This can combo pretty well with things like Vine Prison. So parting gifts, you can put this on your first casting turn, and then you can get some crazy effects where you spam summons and you just keep healing on the summons. And with a tanky front line or maybe some archers in the background that the enemy are desperately trying to kill, parting gifts can be quite frustrating. Projectiles of Decay, I would call this a generally good enchantment with basically no downside. This is one of the few things in nature that I would say is just generally top tier and really has no actual weakness. Now, all support units and battle mages and range units and skirmishers, so we're hitting a lot of things here, deal +2 blight damage with a 60% chance of inflicting decaying. Decaying this is not poison, this is a second dot you're putting on an enemy. Now it doesn't stack, but unit sustains 10 blight damage and cannot regain hit points. Now, decaying counters regeneration, so if an enemy has stacks of regeneration, you would need to decay them multiple times, but if they can't cleanse decay, or if they were relying on regeneration stacks, or if they had some sort of lifesteal effect that they were trying to retaliate with, every single one of your backliners being able to afflict decaying is really strong. Projectiles of Decay, I would say, is just generally really good, and also hard stops a lot of really cheesy strategies from working. Druid of the Cycle is one of the units you can build. It's a very confusing unit that I don't know whether or not it's good, and it is very confusing. Continuing the, what do you even want to call it? Continuing the path of nature having very weird units that are way too complicated and difficult to understand whether or not they're good. We have a tier 4 support unit, so it can get all the buffs from support units, and it is tier 4. So I need to check something. It is very strong. I just needed to double check that it's not a form. So no, it doesn't get racial buffs. Some people seem to think it does because it has a face, but I'm almost entirely sure it doesn't. So it doesn't get your racial buffs, but it is, I'm just gonna go through here. Its main strengths here are just 24 damage on hit, making it a pretty high damage nuking support unit. So if you ever need to use it to do damage, you can do good damage. Now, its main abilities here are, they all synergize with life from death. When this unit kills another, its cooldowns are reset. Now we have Cycles End, which is full actions for range, slight chance of instantly killing an injured target. The chance increases the lower the target's hit points are. If unsuccessful, the target gains weakened. So once again, we have another one of these nature units that's kind of a dice roll. Does it instantly kill that half health enemy, or did you spend an entire turn of one of your highest tier units inflicting 3 weakened? Yeah. Restart the Cycle is probably the more powerful ability. A 6 range full action ability that can revive an ally with 70% of their hit points or heal an ally for 70. For using an entire turn's actions, this is pretty good. Even as a support unit, this is pretty good. And then do remember, your support units will generally have a bunch of free actions they can use from the enchantments throughout a game. So that Restart the Cycle, I would say, is pretty good. Sacrificial Blight is 1 action, so this is the one that you can move while using. And this goes into the whole spamming supports thing I was trying to explain earlier. Target non-hero friendly unit is killed. Adjacent enemy units suffer 10 blight damage per tier of the unit sacrificed. This ability always triggers life from death. They put it there to make sure you understood the synergy. So Sacrificial Blight allows you to blow up an ally, deal damage to enemies, and reset all the Druids of Cycles cooldowns, which can be Restart the Cycle for the revive. Now, Druid of the Cycle, of course, does have this synergy with the Tome, where whenever an ally dies, it heals nearby allies. So we've got Cycles End to try to one-shot an enemy, Restart the Cycle to revive an ally, and Sacrificial Blight, which allows you to kill an ally to reset all your cooldowns. Overall, it's a very complicated unit that a lot of times is a bit too complicated and doesn't really work because it's too complicated to use, and while enemies are just running up and like doing a bajillion damage with their tier 4 units, you're not. If this unit was a racial unit and got racial buffs, it would obviously be a good bit better because it would probably be tankier, but it's not, so you got to go with what you get. It's firmly, I would say it's kind of underwhelming. It's a bit too complicated to use, and the blunt matter of fact is the majority of times, I think it just takes too long to get going. Every turn has to be spent on 1 action, and so you can try to kill an enemy, it fails. Next turn, you blow up an ally. Okay, next turn, you try to kill an enemy, it succeeds, right? So you haven't really done much on these turns, but you've been spending this whole time. Its main use is the ability to revive an ally. Now, that is really strong, I will admit. Now, the last thing here is an interesting ability. Much like everything weird in nature, it's an interesting ability. This is a Sustained City spell. Now, you put this on a city. whenever a battle is fought within that city's domain, it does the cycle of seasons. And this will be a global effect going on in the battle. You don't need to cast anything in the battle. It'll just be going on the entire battle. Now, the first turn of battle, every enemy unit takes 10 frost damage. That's not as much as you're thinking. By this stage of the game, most enemies are going to reduce that to like 6 damage, 5 damage, or even 4 damage. So that's not that amazing. It's a little bit of a hit. Next turn, all friendly units become strengthened. Next turn, all friendly units heal 10. Next turn, all enemies get 1 weakened. Next turn, it cycles back. Now, it's not really that strong, let's be fair. But it is an action that you can use your world map casting points to put on a city, and then you can also spend your mana during the battle to cast your spells as normal. Which is to say, Cycle of Seasons can help spend that excess mana you'll generate from being nature to do more in a battle than an enemy could. Now, the obvious downside here is it doesn't really do that much. At the end of the day, every 4 turns, enemies take 6 damage. You heal 10. You get strengthened a little. They get weakened a little. Now, sometimes not doing that much is all you need to do. But then you also need to remember it's only defensively and only in your domain. You could do some trickery where an enemy is standing outside your domain and you expand via like a population and then you quick take a fight with Cycle of Seasons. I don't know. It's okay. So Tome of Cycles does have a build that it's trying to do. It does have, I spam summons, and now I can, use Druids of the Cycle with those summons to blow things up. It does have synergy. It does have an idea. It's just not that good compared to other tomes who also have some sort of building or something, some synergy. This does nothing for my economy, and the Druid of the Cycle is kind of underwhelming. I'm going to go to Tome of Vigor and then hopefully remember to go back to Tome of Dragons. If I forget to go to Tome of Dragons, sue me. So Tome of Vigor is how you can also synergize with Tome of Cycles. How do I do that? Well, first off, we don't have a building. Why do we not have a building? I don't know. I really wish nature had more buildings, but let's go on. Tome of Vigor gives us Summon Greater Animal. Summon Greater Animal just summons a tier 3 or tier 4 animal. Animals are not that strong, and spending 150 mana summoning them is not really that strong. Summoning a tier 3 unit is not some like crazy thing. We could get that back in tier 2 tomes. But here we go, and we're summoning tier 3, maybe tier 4 animals. The animals are a bit understat, not really that good, but it's okay. Here we got Totem of the Wild. Totem of the Wild spawns a random tier 1 animal unit at the start of your turns and lasts 3 turns. So this can give us fodder for the Tome of Cycles to cycle between, either AoE healing animals when they die, or allowing our Druid of the Cycles to blow them up to deal damage to enemies. Now, it does only summon a tier 1 animal, so it's not that amazing, let's be real, but it does last 3 turns. Now, the problem here is the animals it summons don't come in with action points. So it summons them. First turn you get to do nothing. Second turn you move and attack. Third turn you attack and then they die. So the animals you summon are not that amazing. The totem itself also only lasts for 3 turns. So you can't like hide it in the back or anything. It'll only summon 3 tier 1 animals over 3 turns. It's truthfully really not that good. It costs 80 mana, which is quite a lot. 35 combat casting, which is quite a lot. Really, it used to be a lot better, but it got nerfed into the ground. And between its summons only lasting 3 turns and not coming in with action points, it's not really that good anymore. And really could be buffed to, at the very least, they come in with action points. Unleash the Beast is one of these very powerful effects that could definitely use a little bit more attention. Maybe people should look at it more, but it is an interesting thing. So it affects only 1 target animal or 1 target cavalry. That unit gets 5 strengthened for 50% damage, 5 bolstered defense for 5 defense, then becomes berserk. It's interesting. You could combo some other buffs you do to animals. You could also combo it with some high tier cavalry you made from your race. Berserk means it runs into an enemy and instantly deals as much damage as it can. you don't get to control it. It's the problem is, and I kind of have to retract my statement, it's often just not that good. It's 100 mana, 40 combat casting, so you really can't cast much after you use this one until late game, unless you have some form to generate combat casting points. But at 100 mana, it's just not doing nearly enough. If it was like an AoE, I would understand it a bit better, but it's not. And I think this is actually, for the most part, the more I look at it, the more I realize I'm actually wrong. This is pretty crap. No further comment. Now, Empowered Beasts is probably the strongest attribute from the Tome of Vigor. All beast units deal 20% more damage, and they gain 10 hit points. That includes summoned units, that includes every one of them. So these beasts, which are kind of low quality, now become average quality. And you can summon a lot of them, and they have low maintenance. This allows you to get a lot of them and be very strong. They also get decreased number of units in a formation, which, as I've explained earlier, if you go from having 6 units in a formation to having 4 units in a formation, that makes you much less able to be whittled away at and lose damage from damage, because the less units in your formation you have remaining, the less damage you deal. Okay, now this Buzz Soul Animals, this is pretty good, and if you're doing a beast build, I would say this is like really good. Coming in here at tier 3, it's a pretty good buff to beasts. I like it a lot. There's just a lack of building here is so noticeable. Then we got Super Growth. Now this is a racial enhancement that I would actually say is a pretty good racial enhancement. What does it do? Your entire race gets 10 more hit points, gets another retaliation attack, and gets decreased number of units in a formation. So that +1 retaliation attack can be super impactful in helping you win melee v melee fights. The decreased number of units in formation can also be super impactful in just helping you eke out a little bit more damage. The 10 hit points used to be a lot better. You'll notice this a lot in nature. That 10 hit points used to be a lot better when the average health was like 80 to 100, but now when the average health of units is like 130 to 140 after the early game, you know, once you get some veterancy and buildings and boosts and stuff like that, like the 10 health is just not really that big a deal anymore. So as a whole, I think Super Growth is still really good, but it went from being like, oh my god, this is incredible, to, yeah, it's still pretty good. That's the entire Tome of Vigor, so we're getting into the problem. That's all it does. Okay, now we're getting to the tier 4 tomes. I think Tome of Paradise is absolutely incredible and leads into a potential win condition, which I'll explain in a second. Now, Tome of Paradise it's got 6 spells. Almost all of them are good, so you can fill your entire tech tree at this point with good spells to get. It's got a building, which is a pretty good building. It gives you 15 stability, flat up. It does count as a farm. Then it gives you 7 food per adjacent grasslands, which probably is going to be 4 or 5 once again. So we're looking at like 35 food, 15 stability. Okay, for one building, that's pretty good, but it is a tier 4 building. So then it converts 10% of food income into mana. Now you do lose that food, but you get a lot of mana. And as we've looked over the previous tomes, you generate a lot of food with the Tome of Paradise. So we generate way more food than we would any other resource. So for example, if I could generate 100 food from other tomes, I could maybe generate 60 production. So we're converting this food into mana, and that's quite good. This is a way to make that food excess actually still usable in the late game. Once we're reaching that point where the game's going to end in 10 to 20 turns, it doesn't really matter if we lose +1 population. That's not the end of the world. But having an additional 1,000 mana or even 1,500 mana will help me a lot. Well, it won't be that much. Let's say maybe an extra 1,000 mana depending on your setup over the last little bits of the game. So I would say the Garden of Bliss is pretty good, and then the 15 stability has some good synergy, which we'll go into here. The first spell is Exhilarating Pollen. Now this is a global buff. You cast it in a battle, and all friendly units get 15 morale, and all enemy units have a chance of becoming distracted. This is a good counter to morale builds that are trying to debuff your morale, which is less and less relevant as time goes on, and morale is just easier and easier to find. So from that perspective, it's kind of gotten power creeped because you don't really need a morale spell these days, but the chance of distracting enemies is also kind of power creep because there's so much status resist in the game. So I guess when I last thought about this spell, is a lot better. It's not a bad spell, but it's not as giga as it used to be. Let's put it that way. Now, Enchanted Bloom, as I said earlier, one of the problems is Shadow gets their effect of this spell at tier 3. You get it at tier 4. So you start altering all terrain. It's a sustained spell, so you cast it once. All terrain starts becoming forest and grassland, meaning it's both the buffs of forest and grassland. All terrain starts being altered into that at 1 province per turn. Now, here's the problem. This gives you any terrain with a grassland, forest, fungus field, or mushroom forest gives 2 food, 2 production, 2 draft. The issue with this build as compared to Cold Dark is Marching Winter costs less. It's 120, 120, so you can cast it more often. You get it at tier 3, so your entire area will be snow much quicker than your entire area will be grasslands or forest, because you're casting this like 20 turns earlier into the game, and it's cheaper to cast, so you can cast it more often. Because the other one is 150. Now I only get 2 food, 2 production, but basically the issue here is as compared to going with a frosty domain, Tome of Paradise has the issue where your entire advantage for getting this late in the game is to get draft. But as we've gone over, a lot of the advantages of nature isn't draft, it's mana, so that you can summon units. So it is better technically in that you get more draft, but let's say you had a 20 population city, that's a draft of 40. Is worth getting the same spell but weaker worth 40 draft? No. So we kind of get into the issue of why nature builds are kind of being beat out by shadow builds. Now we got Nature's Bounty. This one is pretty good. All friendly units in the target province get 15 max hit points and regenerate 15 extra hit points for the next 2 turns. You can cast this on your army before battle, which again gives nature a way to turn mana into direct buffs, but you cast this on your army before battle and then it just gets 15 more hit points. Problems? 1, health is way higher than it used to be. So again, instead of between Super Growth and Nature's Bounty, your army on average used to go from like 100 health per unit to 125, which is a lot. Now you're going from like 130 to 155, which is clearly not as much, okay? Now, why would I call Tome of Paradise still amazing Giga tier? Because a guy is chosen. Now, Gaia's Chosen, you'll never believe this, but it's been totally power creeped because 20 hit points is not what it used to be. So once again, this turns your entire race into plants. So in the past, you would go from 100 hit points to 120 to 135 to 145. Going from 100 hit points to 145, yeah, your entire front line are now the beefy bruiser boys who can't die. But now you go from like 130, or at this stage of the game, probably 140 HP, to like 175. It's not the same, you know? It's good, but every frontline these days is tanky. It used to be frontlines could melt pretty easily with focus fire, except for plant frontlines could be tanky, but now everyone is tanky, so plants aren't unique in that. But we do get some big buffs here. 1, we get 3 status resist baseline, so it is extraordinarily hard to debuff plant people. The plant unit type, though, here's the issue. Basically a hard debuff. You're taking -4 fire resist and -2 blight for 2 lightning. Forest walk doesn't matter because we already have forest walk, because we already got it down here from Tome of Glades. So in total, the problem is Gaia's Chosen has been totally power creeped. It's just not nearly as good as it used to be. But there is still one thing that Nature Tome has that, even though it's been power creeped really hard, is still outrageously powerful. So we turn our entire race into plants. That's pretty good. Here we have another sustained city spell. So if you do play nature and you do go into Tome of Paradise, I do recommend you get more world combat casting points. Somehow you need to be able to cast more. But here's another spell we need to be able to cast. So you got Enchanted Bloom, which we need to cast a lot of, and then we got Blessing of Paradise we need to cast a lot of. If we unlock our tier 2 tomes, or sorry, tier 4 tomes, maybe let's say turn 40, I don't know. I mean, 40 seems about right in my head. But we don't want to be casting still these two spells until turn 60. We need to get through them quicker. But at the current rate things are, if you don't increase your world casting points, you could literally still be casting these spells until turn 60, never able to use Nature's Bounty, never able to use Fortress of Vines, because you're still just casting these two over and over again on your cities. But let's move on. Blessing of Paradise gives a city 40 stability, and then the income bonuses from positive city stability are doubled. What this means, in combination with Garden of Bliss and some other stability buffs, you could potentially be taking your city from plus 10% output, increasing their stability a lot, going to plus 15% output, and doubling that. So you could have your cities go from 10% output to 30% more output. So Blessing of Paradise, if you get these on all your cities, is quite strong. So between these two, we could get a lot of output on food production and draft, and then giving that another modifier. So Tome of Paradise is very good at producing very powerful cities. Then we have Tome of Vines, which helps considerably. You get 10 fortification health, 2 per forest or mushroom feature in the domain, which is probably at this point at least like 20. So we're looking at like 50 extra fortification. So your city will take 9 years to siege. And then we have 2 things here which are very important. 1, plant units drafted in the city or summoned within the city's domain get +1 rank. Well, your entire race is plants. Several unit recruits with +1 rank, so long as you can get Fortress of Vines down. Then, if anyone fights a battle within your domain, every single turn, a living vine gets summoned next to a random enemy. Now, these living vines are, as we might be showing earlier, if we had the Tome of Cycles, these living vines could be using for parting gifts to heal nearby allies, or they could just be getting summoned to waste enemies' turns and make them react to them. And that's just free so long as it's Fortress of Vines. So long as we have this combo here, we will end up with very powerful cities who end up plants, and we'll end up recruiting our units at a higher veterancy rank. And remember, the higher veterancy you go, the better. So if we have our city, if we have our leader ambition track, there's +1 veterancy. We have Fortress of Vines, there's +2 veterancy. And if we have the guild, the smithy guild, there's +3. So we could be recruiting our our rank 3 units. We could be recruiting them at veteran 3, which would be pretty strong. So overall, I would say Tome of Paradise, despite being power creeped a bit, is still pretty strong as a tome. This brings us to Tome of Nature's Wrath, which is a tome that you are allowed to pick. No one can stop you from picking this tome. No building, once again, but we have Destructive Regrowth. This is a terraforming spell, which target enemy province that doesn't contain an ancient wonder, has its province improvement raised, and becomes a forest, and enemy units suffer 20 blight damage. This is incredibly bad. It's totally power creeped off the planet and doesn't really make any sense. So here we have a tier 4 spell that requires you to be on enemy's land, requires there to be a province improvement, does 20 blight damage and creates a forest. Now it does hit all enemy armies, which is fantastic. Enemy armies, okay, of course you're gonna say, you're gonna compare it to a shadow ability. Of course I'm gonna compare it to a shadow ability. Now look, you can say it's a Magic the Gathering play or anything like that. The color pie. Nature doesn't have good nuking spells, so their spells should be bad. Okay, but the problem is, even if nature doesn't have good nuking spells, why would I be going into nature to then get really bad nuking spells? Of course, we're gonna compare it to Flash Freeze. Target province, any province at all, is altered to an Arctic, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's already an Arctic province, we can do it again. Whereas a nature one needs an enemy province improvement, and it can't already be raised. This one makes all enemies suffer 20 frost damage and gives them -5 status resist. So this one is the same mana as a nature one and comes out at tier 3 instead of tier 4. Does the same damage, has no condition, and then gives them a very large debuff in the next fight. Nature's version of that does the same damage, transforms it just as well, and then has a whole bunch of restrictions. And then here's another thing. Here's another thing. It doesn't do any debuff. Oh, I forgot. No, it's you can't use it on a wonder, but you can use it at the same province repeatedly. Now, they might have changed it. It might be freely usable at this point, because I'm noticing there's no text there. So I think this might actually be freely usable. Even if it was, it doesn't really matter, because Marching Winter just blows this out of the world. Now, I'm not saying this spell is useless. I'm not saying this spell is terrible. I'm just saying that it is an option, so this tome is giving you the option to go for destructive regrowth, and maybe the argument can be that because nature generates a lot of mana, that they can use destructive regrowth more often. My counter to that statement would be that then if I've generated a lot of mana and I'm going with a mana generation build that nukes people on the world map, why would I go for Tome of Nature's Wrath instead of just Cold Dark? There's really no reason. But, okay. So we got Tome of Nature's Wrath. Destructive Regrowth, pretty mediocre. Let's go to Awaken Instincts. Is this one good? Yeah, actually, I would say this one is one of nature's better spells out there. Now, it does cost a lot of mana. 150 mana, 50 combat casting, so you cannot cast this very often. But what does it do? All friendly units, not enemies, in a 2-hex radius heal for 25, regain all their action points, but they go berserk. Why is this good? You take your entire turn as normal, then you cast this spell. Then all the allies heal up, so the retaliation attacks or whatever, they heal up, and then they regain all their action points and go berserk, meaning if you've put them into a good position, they'll instantly start just beating the crap out of every enemy nearby them. This is pretty good. There are flaws to it. The AI's usage of abilities can sometimes be sketchy. Using this on ranged units can also sometimes be sketchy, but it can be a pretty strong ability at just giving you a massive turn that does an absolute crap load of damage. Again, Devolve is a spell. That's about all I can say for it. I will keep making this joke. Target non-hero unit has a base 90% chance of being transformed into a random tier 1 animal until the end of the battle. If this hits, quite good. But a base 90% chance, and then with all the status resist buffs, you're looking at like a 30 to 40% chance for it to work. And it's your entire turn. If it doesn't work, they do get stunned, which is good. It does have some backup effect here, but if I try to use it on, let's say, a tier 4 or 5 unit, thinking, aha, I can turn them into an animal, you're spending your entire turn for the vast majority of times to just stun a single enemy unit. Coming out of tier 4 tome, not good. Awaken the Forest, is this good? No. Target a province with a forest. The forest is removed and an army of plants or animals under your control is summoned. Most of the time, this is going to be low tier units. In fact, if I want to look at this really quick, just give me 1 second, because I think there is a website that shows the exact numbers. Yes, they do have the exact numbers here. So the vast majority of units in the army, that will be 6 units. It has a 50% chance of being mid-tier units and a 50% chance of being low-tier units. So half the army will be, on average, tier 1 units. Half the army will be, on average, tier 3 units. This is not really that amazing for a tier 4 spell. It can summon you an army out of thin air, but this also costs 400 mana and 400 world combat casting points. So if you haven't generated a crap load of world combat casting points, this could take you 4 turns to cast. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you want to be spending most of your casting points getting all these good spells onto your cities. When do you have time to summon a crap army of crap units? Which brings us into our next problem. The Horned God. The Horned God is a unit. It's not a bad unit. I'm not going to make that joke. I don't think it's a bad unit, but it does run into the problem where I need to summon him using my valuable world combat casting points. Is it good? Okay, so it buffs every unit in your army. Animal and plant units no longer lose morale. So these units will slowly build morale up over the battle, and they will slowly get the crit chance from high morale. But all they'll do is get the crit chance. They're not going to be like some crazy unit anymore. It does count as a Fey unit, which, unfortunately, once again, It counts as a Fey plant unit even. Oof. That gives it -6 blight resist, -4 fire resist as your tier 5 Giga unit. Problem is, all you do is you get a little bit of spirit resist and some lightning resist in return for anyone who brings fire or poison damage being able to burn you down. Now, this spirit resist can be impactful. I will admit that spirit resist can be impactful. I do like it. Now, it does get a massive damaging ability, 32 damage, that heals an ally for 15. So what's the problem? It's a mythic unit. It gets no buffs from anything you've done all game. A lot of your early game units, even a Druid of the Cycle, could potentially be having a better attack simply because they count as a support unit and therefore get all the buffs you've gotten throughout the game. They'll be getting all those free use actions. They'll be getting decaying attacks. So, for example, if all I have is projectiles of decay, Poison Blast will deal 28 damage with a high chance of decaying. Horned God, a tier 5 Giga unit, will get a 32 damage and heal an ally 15. Not heal all allies 15, heal only one adjacent ally 15. So Reclaiming Bolt is not a very good use of his actions, it just doesn't do enough. Wild Eruption is a good use of his actions. This is a triple action ability, so you can't move after casting it, but it deals 30 physical damage to all enemies in a 1 hex radius. Then every unoccupied every unoccupied hex in that radius then gets Wild Eruption, so that summons a Living Vine onto it. So we summon a lot of Living Vines, and we do, at this point in the game, probably like 10 damage. Because a lot of people are going to have a lot of defense. Overall, it's a decent, good use of actions, but that's about all I can say. Now, he does get another ability. He does get Animate Flora, which at this stage of the game is going to be absolutely terrible for every reason. I'm using a tier 5 unit to summon a Floral Stinger, a tier 2 unit. Not blowing my mind. Does it get anything else that makes it good? No, not really. That's about it. Yeah. So I'm not having my mind blown, is what I'm saying. This is a tier 5 unit. I don't think anyone has built it that often. Some people have gone it. Tome of Nature's Wrath, I think, what did I rank it? I think I need to rank this tome even lower than I ranked it previously, because now that I'm reading it again, holy crap. Its literal only use here is Awaken Instincts, and that's good, but you're going an entire tome for Awaken Instincts? I think not. The only possible exception is if you had no world nuking abilities, you had somehow managed to expertly avoid getting anything that could nuke the world map, and then you can go Destructive Regrowth, which, okay, sure, why not? Now that brings us to Tome of the Stormborne. These two are why Tome of Nature's Wrath will never be unlocked ever again. So Tome of the Stormborne, this is a multi-tome, has no building, which kind of sucks. But what does it do then that's so good? One is Bounty of the Sea. Target owned city gets double the base resources from coastal province improvements, which is not nearly as amazing as you're thinking. Because let's say, for example, I had 5 provinces out at sea. I'm trading 10 city stability for 25 resources, which at this stage of the game is not that amazing. I'm not saying it's useless, but like, you would need more like 8 to 10 province improvements out there. It's just not that great, but it is okay. Nugget transformation is one of the only transformations in the game with no downside whatsoever. I will remember to go over Tome of Dragons. I just remembered that's the other one with no downside. So Nugget transformation gives your entire race fast movement, which is really good. Basically, everyone moves as fast as cavalry now. It's not basically, everyone does move as fast as cavalry now. Amphibious, allowing you to totally ignore the penalties of embarked. You can embark and disembark with no movement penalty. You have faster movement over rivers and swamps, which is really good. Slip away, so your entire race now, after being killed, will then heal 15 and teleport 3 hexes away. This makes you really frustrating to kill because every single person in your race is now using this. It's really annoying. You are now also immune to all electrified completely, 2 blight resist, 2 lightning resist, No downside other than mounted units are no longer mounted, and heroes can no longer be mounted or use leg equipment. Now, I will admit, losing leg equipment is probably the biggest downside of this, but all the other bonuses are rather good. Just slip away to your entire race is incredible. And then the fact that it has no downside makes it a very powerful race transformation. What comes up next is Stormbringer. Now, Stormbringer can do one of two things. You can go with a melee build Stormbringer or a range build Stormbringer, or screw it, you just go both. This is a lightning damage unit that is very good at being a skirmishing unit. It counts as a racial unit, so it gets all the racial buffs. It comes up with 104 stats. It is tier 4, so you are paying a premium. Just to be clear, you are paying a premium in Imperium and tier 4 unit upkeep. So don't think, oh my god, it's tankier than tier 3 units. It's so much better. I mean, it is better, but it also costs a lot more. So it's a tanky unit, very high status resist, and it is a skirmisher. So it, of course, it gets slippery and swift, which, you know, is obviously not as amazing as you think, because you're probably a Naga if you're getting this unit. Now, its amazing effects are Storm Strikes. It is 16 damage on its attacks baseline, which is really, really good. But then it also does that lightning damage to, I think it's up, it doesn't say here, it's really annoying. I think they deleted the tooltip. It deals 8 lightning damage for up to 2 enemy units within, I think, 2 hexes. And then I believe every target also then has a 90% chance to be electrified. So this unit does amazing AoE damage and debuffs with electrified. Now, if an enemy is better than you at melee, you just slip away with slippery and swift. You just walk away, They can't stop you. They legally cannot stop you. And then you throw a Storm Trident. A Storm Trident hits enemies on a 3-hex line. So 1 hex, 1 hex, 1 hex. So it can AoE. It always hits. It can't be dodged. And it inflicts a good chunk of damage, 24. Not like, oh my god, game-breaking levels of damage, but pretty good damage, and electrifies all enemies. The Stormbringer, then, is a very fast, semi-decently tanky skirmishing unit that can either absolutely plow through enemy formations in melee, or it can plow through enemy formations at range, and often it can do both. It can harass enemies at range, and then when enemies get close to attack you, it just beats them in melee anyway. Man, I did it again, didn't I? Well, I mean, we know I did. We just heard me do it. So basically, this unit's good at everything it does. Now, it doesn't do anything incredible or outstanding, so to speak. It doesn't have some crazy broken ability. It's just generally a good unit. It's a powerhouse unit. And it does lots of lightning damage, so this gives you a racial tier 4 unit that you can stack all your racial buffs on and make very, 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 very powerful and very high damage. And of course, you remember the Naga transformation also gives you slip away. So, yeah. So it's very, very strong. Downpour is a thing, I guess. Downpour is a very interesting, let's put it this way. Downpour is a very interesting ability that I guess I'm downplaying. It's much better than I think. So it's a world map spell. Alters terrain to swamp if land. If not on land, you can cast it anyway. The only thing you can't do is cast it underground. However, all units on this province, so you cast it on enemies before you take a battle, all units become wet. Wet, of course, reduces your lightning resist and your frost resist to give you a little bit of fire resist, but you might have a unit doing massive lightning damage who massively benefits from -4 lightning resist. Then it gets worse because they also become slowed in combat. So they don't retaliate as much, letting your Stormbringers hit even beefy, tanky frontline units without getting retaliated as much, or at all if they don't have more than one, and they have slow movement. So these Stormbringers can easily get out of melee range, harass with Storm Tridents forever, and just generally be a huge pain. Then units with amphibious and water movement are not affected. Most enemies will not have water movement or be amphibious. Only you really will be. So this makes you really, really, really strong at harassing and generally being a pain in the ass. The last spell here is Lightning Storm. If an enemy engaged a battle with you and you didn't have time to downpour, or you for some reason just forgot, then you have Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm is a spell you cast at the beginning of combat. It then repeats this spell for the next 6 turns. So you've got the first turn, then 6 more turns of Lightning Storm. It will last the entire battle. It's never turning off. Now, what it does that's so good, all units become wet. So once again, everyone gets that lightning resist reduction. Then every single turn, 2 random enemy units get 10 lightning damage and have a 90% chance of being electrified. So this is an ability that gives everyone lightning weakness, and it just does a little bit of damage every turn for 7 turns. Not a lot of damage. Not enough damage to really be that big a deal, mind you. This isn't gonna like break the game. You're maybe doing, after you debuff their lightning, I mean, you're maybe getting like, I'd wager like 20, 25, maybe 25 damage is a good way to put it, damage per turn off this. When you really look at it as a whole, it's not breaking the game, but you cast this at the beginning of a battle, every enemy becomes wet, your Stormbringers can now absolutely massacre them because they have reduced lightning resist, and they just, the longer the battle goes on, the more damage they take. So it's just a really good way to drag out the battle and just do a lot. This brings us to Stormport. Now, Stormport is an interesting city structure, let's put it that way. It gives you 12 mana by default, which is but then for every Stormport in your empire, you get 4 mana, 3 gold. Now, you can only build this if they have a province in the sea. So if you have 1 Stormport, you're getting 16 mana, 3 gold. If you have 2 Stormports, you're getting 20 mana and 6 gold per Stormport. So the more Stormports you have, the more the Stormports get buffed. 3, 4 Stormports, for example, if you have 4 Stormports, that's 28 mana and 12 gold for every single Stormport. So this can generate a crap load of mana, which if you're going with a heavy casting build that's casting on the world map and casting in battle, this can give you the mana needed to just churn all that stuff out. Tome of the Stormborne is very powerful. Most DLC tomes are very powerful. Tome of the Stormborne is no exception, and I think it's really good. I like it. This brings us to Tome of Prosperity. Now, I did go over this one yesterday, so I'm probably going to spend a little bit less time here. Tome of Prosperity is, once again, it's like one of the best tomes in the entire game. We've got Grand Protection, which is a buff spell. All friendly units in a 2-hex radius get 2 grace, 2 regeneration, 3 bolstered defense, 3 bolstered resist. It is outrageously good at making your army hard to kill once they buff them up. It can be comboed with either tanky units or kiting units. Because they have 2 grace, they'll keep getting healed when they get hit. The bolstered resistance and defense makes them tanky, and the 2 regeneration helps them stay alive. This is just a really good spell, period. It costs a lot of mana and a lot of combat casting points, but if your idea is to outlast your enemy, this is very, 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 very strong. Garden of Effluence gives you 10 city stability, and then every farm and forester in your domain gives you gold and mana. Now, the later in the game you go, the less farms and foresters you want, but particularly if you're going a nature build and you have lots of food and therefore lots of population, you'll probably have more farms and more foresters. It also, I should mention, the building right now has the Shrine of Prosperity. So this gives you a conduit, which are, as always, are questionable, but it gives you 3 city stability per farm and forester adjacent. Then it gives you 7 food per farm and forester adjacent. Then it gives you 10% of your food income converted to gold. So this would allow you to take a lot of your food income and turn that into more useful late game gold income, while also meaning that if you had stacked a lot of farms and foresters, you're going to get a lot of city stability off that to potentially synergize with some other things, or just to generally make them more useful. It also allows you to get the Blessed Dragon, Radiant Guardian, and Righteous Judge. The later in the game you go, the less useful this is going to be. Me personally, I think that the Radiant Guardian is the most useful one I was looking at, just because it gives you a tier 3. Okay, you know what? Let me just, it's not going to work with me. It gives you a tier 3 shield unit that you can buff up. It's not as good as other shield units at all, and it is not a racial one, so it's going to be much weaker. But some factions just can't they don't have tier 3 shield units to swap back to. And this one doesn't, like, it's not the main aspect of a tome. You just unlock Tome of Prosperity, build the building, and then you can build this unit. So it is a shield unit. It does get above average stats. It does a decent amount of damage for a tier 3 unit. That's pretty decent, with 10 physical, 4 spirit. The Radiant Transposition, you swap position with a friendly unit, then enter defense mode. Then all enemies have a 60% chance of being pacified, which would not let them attack. So this could bring some of your ranged units out, pacify enemies, just generally be a complete dick. It's of course got Draconic Rage, so it does more damage, the lower HP it has. It's got Inner Grace, so before you get the spell that gives every unit Inner Grace, it already has that, which isn't really that relevant. It just gives you the option to put a couple shield units in your army that can keep people safe. It's not that amazing, but I think it's more relevant to nature builds because they could have some good buffs to tankiness or shield units already that would make it better. Okay, so that's all I'll say about that. I don't think the other ones are worth building. They come in too late and they don't get racial buffs. Staves of Grace gives all your support units Inner Grace, which, as I mentioned earlier, they get Grace at the start of round if they didn't already have it. Grace heals you 10 hit points every time you're attacked, stacks up to 5 times, becomes quite good. The support abilities grant 1 Grace. So every time you use the support ability, you just AoE Grace everyone. You could potentially stack Grace and make your units quite frustrating to kill. You've got the Cleansing Rain ability, which, as I mentioned earlier, removes all debuffs from allies, removes all buffs from enemies. Outrageously strong ability, especially in an AoE, can completely turn the battlefield. So Staves of Grace, if you've been building support units, which you probably have in nature, you can make them even stronger. Blessed Armors is an absolutely nutty ability, giving all melee units 2 resistance for free, and gives them all Inner Grace. So they start the turn, and if they don't have Grace, they get a stack of Grace. So all your melee units will at least heal 10 every turn if they're attacked. So Blessed Armors, the 2 resistance, the Inner Grace, you're very tanky, and you won't die. Prosperity Dragon, as I mentioned earlier, is a quite frustrating unit for enemies to fight because of the Reign of Prosperity, which gives all friendly units another stack of Grace, and then cleanses 1 random negative status effect. Now that's all allies across the entire board, so that's really good. I'm trying to get through Tome of Prosperity quickly because we've been here before, and I'm sure it's like not that interesting for me to just be like, yeah, that's top tier, that's top tier, that's top tier, that's broken, that's top tier, right? Like, okay. And then it has Bestow Mask of Prosperity, which is damage sustained. You link to an ally, and then damage sustained by the linked unit is transferred to this unit with a 35% reduction. And then at the start of this turn, this unit and the linked unit get another stack of Grace. Then you can remove Mask of Prosperity as a free action, which consumes all Grace stacks and heals you and your ally for 10 hit points and a stack of regeneration for each Grace stack removed. So in total, Tome of Prosperity is the I never want to die tome, wherein you don't die because you didn't want to. You really didn't want to, so you don't have to die. I don't know a better way to put it. It's so powerful right now. Then, of course, this brings us to the Tome of the Goddess of Nature. Now, I did mention that Gaia's Chosen has a potential win condition. If your opponent hasn't prepped for it, Gaia's Chosen can combo with your tier 5 tome into being a win condition. Now, the first spell in the Goddess of Nature is Forest Awareness. All forests grant vision on the world map. You get vision over every forest on the entire map. It can be good or bad depending on the map. Sometimes you just get to see a lot and it really can suck for enemies. Sometimes you don't see a lot and it can suck for you because it doesn't really do anything from your tier 5 tome. Really just depends on the world map. What can you do? Force of Nature is the ultimate buff to animals and dragons and cavalry even. This makes all cavalry, all animals, all fae, all plants, all dragons, they get 20% more critical hit chance and 4 blight damage on base attacks, non-repeating attacks, so single hit attacks get plus 8 blight damage. This is very powerful, and this makes those crappy animals once you combine this with Empowered Beasts, because you're doing plus 20% damage, plus 20% crit, and then you're also doing plus 4 damage, which then, of course, gets magnified by that plus 20% damage. This allows animal builds to go crazy. Phase Beasts are really good here. But now let's talk about this. Your entire race is plants. Now let's read Mass Rejuvenation. Heals all friendly units 40 temporary hit points. That's really powerful. And I'm sure that's all the spell does, except it also brings all dead friendly animals and plants back to life with 50% of their total hit points. Now, you don't get your action points when you revive, but here's the thing. This includes summons. This includes your race if you've turned them into plants. This includes crappy tier 1 animal that you summoned, ran up and got one shot. All of them. Heals all friendly units 40 temporary hit points. Brings all dead friendly animals and plants back to life. This can win a game if your enemy hasn't prepped for it. It is outrageously powerful. Okay, so with all these tomes done, I'm like kind of rushing now because I'm looking at how much time I've put in this video, and I'm realizing now that maybe a little bit too much time. So as always, we got S+ Tome of Prosperity. This tome is just too good at keeping people alive. It is just too good at keeping people alive. I don't have anything else to say. Now, Goddess of Nature, I would call an S tier tome. Not every tier 5 tome can win a game, but Goddess of Nature is definitely one of them. The massive buffs to animals, the massive AoE healing, just those 2 effects alone, once you get to tier 5, like every animal is now hitting like a truck. All your plants and animals are reviving, and all of them are just getting healed every turn. It's just crazy. A tier is Alchemy, because Alchemy just gives you a lot of knowledge, and generally everything it does is pretty good. I'm not going to call it S tier like some other people. I think it's A tier. Glades, I would also say, I didn't go over Tome of Dragons. Let's back it up. Back it up. Hold up. Just beep, 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 beep. Hold on, everybody. Hold on, we're gonna go over Tome of Dragons, why I would call it A tier. It is A tier for only one reason, by the way. So when we go and we look at Tome of Dragons, we can see something here really quick. Well, actually not really quick. Let's look over it as a whole. One, you might have noticed that nature does not have that many research post building. In fact, it only has the 2 that splash in. Nature does have an issue where it has 3 different transformation tomes, 2 of them being multi-tome, but still it has access to 3 transformation tomes, so you need to pick which major race transformation you're going with. But the Wyvernary is a research post that gives plus 10 knowledge, so that's already good. Then you get plus 5 draft per adjacent farm province. That's kind of okay, I guess. I mean, it's like, let's say on an average day that's 10 knowledge, 10 draft. It's okay. It's not blowing my mind, but it's fine. Then you can produce Wyvern units, which is okay. It's not great. It's not blowing my mind. Just the fact that it's a research post makes it pretty decent. Now, first up here, we have Flamer Focus. This gives a ability to your battle mages that is decent, I guess. It's not amazing. It's okay. In all honesty, I think it could definitely be buffed. It's a triple action ability, so you can't move after casting it, or you can't move and then cast it. 6 range always hits, so it is a long range poke nuke thing. Target sustains damage, adjacent units are dealt 50% of the damage. 10 physical, 10 fire damage is not the highest ever. It's firmly, I'll be real, kind of an underwhelming amount of damage, especially with how hard it is to buff battle mages. Battle mages definitely suffer in this game from not having enough support for them. But then all enemies have a 90% chance to burn, 90% chance to bleed. This can synergize with pyromancers to get multiple turns of AoE fire onto enemies. But overall, I would not rate it too highly. I don't know. I feel battle mages, they enter the game, they're pretty good. By tier 3, you're kind of done with them. And so realistically speaking, this is kind of the last hurrah. You're probably going to be buffing, if you did go them, you're buffing the battle mages you already built. I doubt you're building more. Purifying Flame is another one of these abilities. It's a 25 heal, and then they get full cleansed in a 1 hex radius. That's a lot of mana, and that's a lot of combat casting points for an ability that you could potentially get right here. Anti-magic tincture, sure, it doesn't heal, but it's still a cleanse and gets to status protection. This late in the game, I don't know. I mean, the 25 heal is okay, but it's okay. If you don't have a cleanse, this is a cleanse. And it can be good, and it can remove all debuffs, and it can keep you in the battles. So from that perspective, it's fine. Now, Draconian Transformation has no downside. Turn target race into Draconians, which grants them Dragon unit type for Draconic Rage. You do 30% more damage when you're below 60% health. That is only a buff. Then you get natural regeneration. You heal 10% of your hit points a turn and 10 extra flat hit points per turn on the world map. This is just a major transformation with no downside whatsoever, only buffs. You only buff yourself with no downside, and with 2 buffs that are actually pretty decent. I think I would have liked it if it did a bit more than this, just these 2 effects. Just for like thematic sake, just for the sake of like being interesting, but they are pretty good effects. They are kind of interesting. I do like them, and they are strong. Then we got Dragon Attack, which is a siege project, which is a pretty good siege project at that. Everyone defending the city takes 26 fire damage right at the start of combat, and then have a 90% chance of being lit on fire. Then fires are randomly added to their side of the battlefield. So Dragon Attack is a good way to open a siege. If someone's actually defended, it's a good way to open a siege with a lot of damage, with already a lot of them being debuffed and taking a lot of damage, and just generally making it a bit harder to position by randomly putting stuff on fire. Now, the main advantage of Tome of Dragons is the Young Dragon. Now, this unit is a bit of a hit or a miss, so you can now build naturally Young Dragons. Now, Young Dragons are the evolve unit. They are the evolve unit that comes from they are the evolve unit that if you went with the Tome of Evolution, the Tome of Evolution could buff these units with a little bit more XP gain. What are they? They are a fighter unit, so they're not a shock unit, but they are a fighter unit. They generally get the fighter unit buffs. They have decent enough stats. They'll have 4 resist into one category and -2 into another. So overall, they'll have more resistances. 103 stats makes them for tier 3 unit. They won't keep up with racial units. But, well, yeah, if you haven't done anything to buff your race, I guess you could go with these units. It's a bit of a problem that non-racial units are just generally not that good, but they do have some good buffs here. Intimidating Aura reduces enemy morale. High Maintenance makes them cost more, which is actually not a buff, obviously. Draconic Rage, they do 30% more damage when their hit points are 60% or lower. Tail Swipe is an ability. All enemies lose defense mode in retaliation, so you can Tail Swipe from a dragon to knock enemies out of defense mode, so either archers can hit them easily or other dragons can just easily maul them. Melee Strike is a high damage melee attack with some good amount of magic damage attacks, 17 by default, which is very high even for a tier 3 unit. Most other tier 3 units cap out at like 16 damage. They go all the way to 17, with 5 of it being magical. And so these dragons are pretty strong on their own. They don't get racial buffs, so they're like a little bit undertuned. So what is the advantage then of the dragon unit? Well, if you can get them to the legendary rank, which is harder or easier depending on what kind of build you've gone with, they can transform. So for example, a young frost dragon can transform into a full-blown frost dragon. Now, frost dragons are high maintenance tier 5 units. They're mythics, so they don't get buffed by much of anything. 150, 76 stats are pretty good at the very least. At the very least, they'll keep up with racial units. Now, we are doing a repeatable 28 damage attack, which probably puts them past any racial unit at this stage. You're probably going to have to be looking at giga late tier racial units to possibly equalize melee strike here. But it does, depending on what kind of dragon you've gone with. So this one inflicts blind, this one inflicts slowed. Fire dragons, you'll never believe this, inflict burning. They also then get a breath attack, which allows them to AoE and then also debuff enemies. So example, the Frost Dragon has a 60% chance to AoE freeze, and that's a 3-hex cone. So if you actually got multiple of these dragons, you could get a lot of CC, a lot of damage, a lot of things. They're just generally some of the best tier 5 units. They're very strong, but they are high maintenance tier 5 units. Of course, each of them have different auras. So the Bone Dragon, it's not right. The, here we go. Fire Dragon has Terrifying Aura. The Golden, I think, do they all have Terrifying Auras? Yeah, no, I'm wrong. I'm looking at the wrong aura. They have Fire Aura. There we go. The aura of their damage type. Sorry, I brain farted there for a second. So, for example, a Fire Dragon is Fire Aura. At the start of the turn, every enemy adjacent to this unit takes 8 fire damage and inflicted with burning. So these units are very difficult to stay in melee with because they'll be dot up. Every enemy adjacent to them will slowly be dot up outside of this unit, which has Frost Aura, which has a 90% chance to slow instead of dot enemies. So at the very least, the longer you keep them alive, the more damage they do. What I'm generally trying to say here, without like spending 20 years on this, dragons are strong. Transforming into dragons and evolving into dragons is strong. The Tome of Dragons is very unique and very different, and you have to play for it. But when you do, it ends up being pretty strong. Or you can just say screw it, and you can just grab the Draconic Evolution transformation, and you can just go with that and be done. Tome of Paradise, as I mentioned, potentially opens up a win condition. It has been power creeped a little bit, so I'm not going to call it like one of the best tomes in the game, but it's still a really good tome. I don't think getting that many buffs is bad. Stormborne is good because you get the Stormborne. Tome of Beasts can be good in certain builds. Again, a lot of these nature tomes, they're only going to be good in certain builds, but I think the builds that they're good in, Tome of Beasts is really good. Tome of Roots is not as good as the other damage buffing tomes for tier 1, but it's still fine on its own just because damage buffing is good. Tome of Cycles plays to a play style, and that play style does have a lot of buffs later in the game. It does synergize with the Prosperity Tome. Tome of Cycles does have a lot of things it does that push forward a summon spam build. Tome of Vigor is also pretty good if you're doing beast build, but again, I'm putting it down in B tier because like not everyone does beast build, so a lot of times these tomes will be dead. Fey Mists, honestly, I'm gonna put this in B tier. I don't know why I put it down here. Tome of Fertility, you have to be playing for it to make it useful, and it's not always worth playing for it. So I think I rated these tomes too highly on average, but oh well. Then down here in E tier, we've got Evolution and Nature's Wrath, because I don't think Evolution tier tome is good at all. I think it just screws your game. And Nature's Wrath just does nothing. It's a tier 4 tome that does nothing. So there we go. I'm going to try to end this quickly because we're already 2.5 hours. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.